A disgraced Navy SEAL thought the truth about his last mission was gone forever. 5 years later, Ronan Hale and his aging K9, Rook, moved into an abandoned Minnesota relay station. Then Rook began sensing something hidden beneath the snow. The clues pointed back to the same military system that had destroyed Ronan's name, and someone was still willing to bury the truth again. To survive, Ronan would have to trust Rook one more time. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories. 5 years after leaving the Navy, Ronan Beckett Hale had become very good at repairing things that did not ask questions. Generators were honest. A fuel line either leaked or it did not. A frozen pump could be thawed, a cracked porch beam could be braced, and a pickup buried to its axles in Minnesota snow generally responded to chains, leverage, patience, and the occasional insult. People were harder. At 43, Ronan stood 6'1", broad through the shoulders, with the hard, balanced build of a man whose body still remembered years of special operations training even though the uniform was gone. His face was angular and weathered, the jaw sharply defined beneath short dark stubble. A faint 2-inch scar sat just above his left eyebrow. Deep blue-gray eyes watched more than they revealed. His skin was sun-browned and roughened by wind, and the short dark brown hair he still kept in an old military cut had begun to silver early at both temples. He wore the same practical clothes almost every day. A faded olive field jacket over a red and dark navy plaid flannel shirt, dark green cargo pants, worn brown waterproof boots, and the old military watch on his left wrist that had survived more places than several friendships had. That morning he was lying half beneath a propane generator outside a cedar cabin north of Ely, one gloved hand buried inside the housing. "Try it now," he called. The homeowner turned the switch. The generator coughed once, shuddered like an elderly man offended by dawn, then settled into a steady growl. Ronan slid out into the snow. "There," he said, "it has reconsidered death." The homeowner laughed. Ronan did not, though the corner of his mouth moved. 10 yards away, Rook watched from beside the pickup. The 9-year-old German Shepherd had the compact, athletic shape of a working-line dog rather than the heavy frame of a show animal. His black and tan coat was short, dense, and healthy, a dark saddle sweeping over his back while warm tan marked his chest, legs, and the sides of his face. His amber-brown eyes remained sharp and focused. Both triangular ears stood naturally erect, though a tiny notch broke the edge of the right one. Behind his left shoulder, where the fur grew slightly thinner, a pale scar ran 6 or 7 centimeters through the coat. Age had begun writing on him in quieter ways. Silver touched his muzzle. On very cold mornings, his hind legs needed a few extra steps before they remembered the smooth certainty they once possessed. But when he stood wearing his dark olive working harness over the brown leather collar beneath it, he still looked like what he had been, a military K9 who had spent years learning that the world often hid its worst intentions beneath ordinary surfaces. The homeowner paid Ronan in cash. Ronan counted it once and tucked it into his jacket. "You heading back toward town?" "Eventually." "You ever stay anywhere long enough to call it home?" The question was meant kindly. That made it worse. Ronan glanced toward his pickup with the camper shell mounted over the bed. "It has 4 tires, he said. "That keeps the definition flexible." The homeowner chuckled and went inside. Ronan remained in the white yard while sunlight flashed off the snow so brightly it made him narrow his eyes. He was not homeless. That distinction mattered to him. He owned the truck. He had money in the bank, though not much. He had tools, winter gear, a camp stove, enough work to keep propane in the tank, and a narrow sleeping platform inside the camper shell. He simply owned almost nothing that could not leave with him in 10 minutes. That was intentional. Possessions developed roots. Roots became leverage. Ronan had already learned what happened when a life was built around things other people could remove with signatures. Rook walked over. The dog stood beside him for a moment, then leaned his scarred shoulder lightly against Ronan's leg. Ronan looked down. "Don't psychoanalyze me." Rook blinked. "You're not licensed." The tail moved once. That evening they parked beyond a stand of birch and spruce, where Ronan had permission to camp between jobs. The woods were blue with approaching dusk. Snow rested on every branch, turning the northern forest into something ancient and almost ceremonial. Inside the camper, Ronan heated stew on a small burner while Rook settled beside the rear door. The dog lowered himself carefully. Ronan noticed. He always noticed. "You're getting dramatic." Rook sighed and put his head down. Ronan had begun lifting him out of the truck on especially cold mornings, rather than letting him jump. He never discussed this arrangement, and Rook, to his credit, never discussed the fact that Ronan's right knee sometimes hurt when the temperature dropped. They had survived long enough together to permit each other certain lies. A wrench slipped from Ronan's tool shelf. It struck the metal floor with a hard clang. Rook's head snapped up. Ronan went still. The camper disappeared. For half a breath, snow became pale mountain dust, cold air became heat, and Rook was 4 years old again, fast, hard-muscled, almost tireless. 5 years earlier, Ronan had been 38, and still carried the authority of a Navy SEAL who had spent enough years in dangerous places to distrust certainty. Rook had been assigned as his primary operational K-9 after Ronan completed advanced military working dog integration training. They had spent years learning each other's language until commands became almost unnecessary. That night overseas, the team moved through broken mountain terrain beneath a sky without moonlight. Their tactical navigation system came from Orison Tactical Systems, a defense contractor that had sold the platform as faster, smarter, and more reliable in hostile terrain. The display showed the narrow ravine ahead as clear. Rook stopped, not hesitated, stopped. His body tightened. His nose worked once toward the ground, then toward the dark corridor ahead. One forepaw lifted slightly. Ronan, that posture. Hold. The team froze. He checked the route again. Green. A second check gave the same result. One of the men whispered that the system was clean. Ronan looked at Rook. The dog refused to advance. People later asked him why he had trusted an animal over several $1 million of navigation technology. They always asked the question as though Rook had been guessing. Ronan ordered the team off the planned line. Minutes later, the ravine erupted. The blast struck behind them, rolling light and debris into the night. Rook had been right. That should have been the story. It wasn't. Forced onto an emergency withdrawal corridor, the unit came under attack a second time. A support specialist was badly wounded. During the confusion, a sensitive navigation and crypto module disappeared. Everyone came home alive. But survival did not make paperwork merciful. The investigation accepted that Rook's warning had justified stopping the initial movement. What followed became the problem. Orison's event logs showed no malfunction. According to the official record, the system had remained within tolerance while Ronan moved his team outside the approved corridor. Without a documented technical fault, the detour became his judgment call. And judgment could be put on trial far more easily than a machine. Grant Mercer Vale testified for Orison. At 52 now, Grant was a narrow-built man with a long, controlled face, pale blue eyes, and ash-brown hair increasingly silver and always combed neatly back. Even years earlier, he had possessed the same polished restraint. He rarely raised his voice. He had never needed to. Men like Grant could cut another person apart while sounding as though they were merely correcting punctuation. He did not accuse Ronan of lying. He did something more effective. He told the board the system showed no qualifying failure and suggested that Ronan's long partnership with Rook might have caused him to place disproportionate operational weight on a K-9's behavioral assessment. It was a beautiful sentence, clean, professional, almost bloodless. Ronan had hated it more than an insult. Then Micah Boone Mercer was called. Micah had served beside Ronan for years. He was 44 now. But in Ronan's memory he remained broad-shouldered and hard from deployment, a long angular face under a helmet, brown-green eyes always quick to catch dark humor before anyone else did. Injuries from that final mission would later leave him leaner, one shoulder slightly lower than the other, and a habit of favoring his left leg. Micah was alive because Ronan had listened to Rook. When the board asked whether he could confirm that the navigation system malfunctioned, Micah stared at the table. "I never saw the screen myself," he said. "I can't testify that the system failed." Technically true. Ronan had spent 5 years discovering how much damage could fit inside 2 technically true sentences. The finding did not call him criminal. Sometimes Ronan thought that would have been easier. Instead, it questioned his judgment and his handling of sensitive equipment. The language was administrative, measured, and devastating. It followed him out of the Navy. Some men lost everything with a gunshot. Ronan lost his by paragraph. The clang of the wrench faded. The camper returned around him. His hand had tightened around the edge of the counter. Rook had risen. The older shepherd crossed the narrow space and placed one front paw firmly on Ronan's worn brown boot. Not obedience. Not a trick. A reminder. "You are here." Ronan exhaled slowly. "Yeah." Rook kept his paw there. "I said I'm here." The dog finally removed it. Ronan picked up the wrench. "You were less bossy at 4. That was a lie, too." 3 weeks later, while waiting for parts at a county office, Ronan noticed a flyer pinned beneath a map of northern Minnesota. The program offered stewardship agreements on decommissioned Forest Service and emergency support properties. Veterans with relevant skills could restore selected sites in exchange for long-term residence and maintenance contracts. Most locations had already been claimed. One remained: Black Spruce Relay Station. 26 years out of service, no grid electricity, seasonal road access, roof deterioration, obsolete radio tower, deferred structural maintenance. Ronan read the page twice. The woman behind the counter warned him that 3 applicants had inspected it and walked away. He asked why. She said, because they had common sense. Ronan looked at Rook. Rook was asleep beneath the window. Could be a problem, Ronan murmured. We're short on that. He applied. A month later, the stewardship papers were approved. Black Spruce lay deep in the northern forest near the boundary waters, reached by a narrow road that wound through red pine, spruce, cedar, and white birch. The day Ronan drove in, winter sunlight poured through the trees in long, clear shafts. Snow glittered blue-white between the trunks. Frozen lakes appeared and disappeared through openings in the forest like polished pieces of sky laid upon the earth. Rook sat upright in the passenger seat, dark olive harness secured over his black and tan coat, amber eyes tracking the woods. Ronan rested one hand loosely on the wheel. He had expected excitement. Instead, he felt suspicion. Hope had always made him suspicious. The final road narrowed until branches brushed the pickup. Then Black Spruce appeared. The station stood on a rocky rise beneath a tall steel radio tower. The main building was timber-framed, larger than a cabin but smaller than a lodge, with a steep roof, a stone chimney, a shallow porch, and windows filmed with 26 winters of neglect. It did not look haunted. It looked tired. Ronan understood tired. He shut off the engine. For several seconds, neither he nor Rook moved. Then Ronan opened the passenger door. Rook prepared to jump. Ronan placed one arm beneath his chest and another near his hindquarters. The dog gave him a deeply offended look. File a complaint. He lowered Rook carefully onto the snow. Rook shook himself and immediately pretended the assistance had never occurred. Ronan pulled his olive field jacket tighter and climbed the porch. The lock gave up after 10 minutes. 2 tools and several statements unsuitable for public radio. Inside, stale air greeted them. Dust floated through bright winter light. The main room contained an old wood stove, shelves, a long table, and a wall map faded nearly colorless. The radio room beyond held analog equipment, copper wiring, cracked headsets, handwritten maintenance cards, knobs whose original purpose had apparently died with the century. Ronan found notes everywhere. Coffee belongs to whoever needs it most. Another, blankets are not inventory during a storm. And beneath that, if someone doesn't want to talk, let them eat first. All were signed with the initials W.K. Walter Keene. Ronan knew almost nothing about the former caretaker except the name in the property file. But the handwriting told him something. Walter had been practical, possibly stubborn, and apparently offended by the concept of bureaucratic hospitality. Ronan liked him already. The first days filled themselves with work. He cleared the chimney, patched 2 roof leaks, cleaned mouse nests from a cabinet, brought the old wood stove back to life. Rook established a sleeping place near a southern window where afternoon sunlight warmed the floorboards. On the 3rd morning, Ronan built a low wooden step beside an old chair because Rook had tried once to climb into it and abandoned the operation with what Ronan considered suspicious dignity. Neither of them mentioned the step afterward. The station began, slowly, to feel inhabited. That frightened Ronan more than the repairs did. A truck was temporary. A camper asked nothing. But a room that began to know where a man put his boots was dangerous. It could become home. And home was simply the name people gave a place before learning how much it hurt to lose it. One afternoon, while Ronan carried tools toward the radio room, Rook stopped at the threshold. Completely, his ears rose. The dog did not sniff the floor. He listened. Ronan waited. Nothing moved beyond the walls. No branch scraped the roof. No animal shifted beneath the porch. Rook? The shepherd looked toward the tower side of the building. For several seconds, his entire body held the silent concentration Ronan remembered from deployment. Then it vanished. Rook walked into the room as if nothing had happened. Ronan remained behind. A strange uneasiness traveled along his shoulders. He told himself an old station contained old sounds, pipes, metal contraction, loose hardware, a mouse with ambitious career plans. Still, that evening he inspected the tower supports twice. He found nothing. By the 4th night, the wood stove burned steadily and Black Spruce smelled less like abandonment and more like pine smoke, old timber, wet boots, and dog. Ronan sat at the radio bench attempting to revive an analog receiver. Rook slept near the stove. Outside the windows, moonlight silvered the snow. The spruce stood completely still. Ronan tightened a connection. Static whispered from the receiver. Then Rook's head rose, fast. His amber eyes opened fully. He stood. The shepherd crossed the room and stopped beside the wall nearest the tower. His ears pointed forward. His nose remained still, listening. Ronan lowered the screwdriver. "What?" Rook did not look at him. The room became so quiet Ronan could hear the stove settling. Then something traveled faintly through the old structure. A thin metallic note, ting. Ronan stared toward the window. No wind stirred the spruce. Not a branch moved. The tower stood black against the pale winter sky. "It's an old building?" he said. The words sounded less convincing once spoken aloud. Rook remained beside the wall. For several minutes he did not move. Later, Ronan banked the fire and turned off the lamps. Rook usually returned to his blanket beside the stove. That night he did not. The old German shepherd lowered himself carefully in front of the tower wall, silvered muzzle between his paws, notched ear angled toward whatever lay beyond timber and steel. Ronan stood in the dark watching him. Rook looked less like an aging dog than an old soldier who had just heard a signal. His only remaining teammate did not yet understand. And for the first time since arriving at Black Spruce, Ronan wondered whether the station had been waiting for someone who knew enough to listen. Morning came to Black Spruce in pale gold. Sunlight pushed through the eastern windows and spread across the old floorboards in long rectangles, exposing dust Ronan had missed, scratches in the wood, and the faint outlines of furniture that had been moved decades ago and never returned. He stood in the kitchen with a mug of coffee in one hand and a screwdriver in the other, staring at a cabinet whose right door refused to hang straight. Rook lay near the south-facing window. The old German shepherd had discovered that if he positioned himself correctly, a stripe of winter sun would warm his shoulders without requiring him to surrender his view of the front porch. Ronan considered this strategic genius. "You've done less work than I have," he said. One amber eye opened. "Don't look at me like that. Supervising is not labor." The eye closed again. Black Spruce had been quiet since the previous night. Ronan had checked the exterior supports, tower base, chimney flashing, roof braces, and every accessible length of exposed cable he could reach without climbing equipment. He found old metal, old wood, old fasteners, and the expected complaints of a structure neglected for 26 years. Nothing more. So he did what he had always done when a problem refused to identify itself. He worked on the things that would. The kitchen cabinets were first. Behind warped doors he found 37 mugs, none belonging to the same set. Some were chipped enamel, some were thick diner ceramic. One carried a faded Minnesota Twins logo. Another said "World's Best Grand Pia" beneath a coffee stain old enough to vote. Ronan placed them across the counter. Walter either had many friends, he said, or one serious mug theft operation. Rook offered no opinion. In the pantry he found dented soup pots, mismatched spoons, an old hand-crank can opener, and a coffee tin filled not with coffee but loose screws sorted into paper envelopes. The labels were written in narrow block lettering. Porcher, tower room, stovepipe lay. Things I will need the day after I throw them away. Ronan smiled despite himself. Walter Keene had apparently believed maintenance deserved both organization and resentment. Later that morning, Ronan moved the old dining table so he could sweep beneath it. Something scratched against his glove when he reached under the edge. He tilted the table. Names had been carved into the underside, dozens of them, initials, dates, short messages. J.M. Phoebe, 1983, Carl plus Denna, Storm of 87 made it home. Thank you, W.K. One carving read simply, "Stayed 3 days, didn't freeze, good enough." Ronan remained crouched longer than necessary. The messages were hidden where guests would never see them during a meal. They had not been carved to decorate the station. They were private gratitude, proof left by people who had needed something, and perhaps did not know how to say so aloud. Ronan understood that particular weakness. He righted the table. In the supply room he found coats hanging from wooden pegs, heavy canvas jackets, wool parkas, one old military field coat, 2 children's-sized snow jackets that had probably belonged to travelers caught in bad weather long before the station closed. Beneath them were folded blankets, some patched repeatedly but carefully washed before being stored. There was a domino set in a wooden box, 3 decks of cards, a first aid cabinet, and on the lowest shelf, several black notebooks. Ronan brought them to the kitchen. The handwriting inside matched the labels on the coffee tin. Walter did not write stories. He wrote facts. January 12th, snowmobile driver from West Trail. Fuel line frozen, kept overnight. Would not stop apologizing for the floor. February 3, veteran, would not give name, ate 2 bowls soup, slept near stove, left before sunrise, took blue gloves, good. March 19, ranger, broken ankle, complained for 6 straight hours. Prognosis excellent. Ronan read that one again. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Rook raised his head. Apparently optimism was different then. The dog's tail tapped once against the floor. Near the stove, Ronan noticed a board he had previously assumed was part of a shelf. He wiped away grime. Words emerged in the same block handwriting. Coffee first, explanations after the storm. Ronan stared at it. 5 years of his life had been built on the opposite principle. Explain yourself first. Prove why you deserve the benefit of the doubt. Give dates. Give names. Give statements. Sign beneath the statement. Then wait while strangers decide whether the shape of your suffering meets procedural requirements. Black Spruce apparently had once asked a simpler question. Are you cold? Ronan set down the rag. The idea unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. A place that did not demand an explanation before offering warmth sounded dangerously close to kindness. Kindness created debts. Debts created expectations. Expectations created disappointment. Ronan had constructed an efficient system against all three. Rook got up. The German shepherd stretched slowly, his hindquarters stiff for the first 2 steps, then crossed the room and pushed his nose against Ronan's wrist. You hungry? Rook looked toward the cupboard. Of course. Emotional complexity defeated by breakfast. After eating, Rook returned to the south window and attempted to climb into a low, upholstered chair Ronan had dragged away from the wall. The chair had a wide seat and one sunken cushion. Rook placed his front paws on it. He gathered himself. His hind legs pushed. For half a second, he nearly made it. Then age negotiated different terms. Rook slid backward onto the floor. He stood perfectly still. Ronan looked away. There were moments when dignity mattered. Rook turned as though the chair had never been of interest. He walked toward the window and sat with extraordinary composure. Ronan bit the inside of his cheek. That afternoon he used scrap lumber to build a low step. He placed it beside the chair. Rook inspected it suspiciously. It's for equipment. Rook climbed the step, then the chair. He turned twice and settled into the sunlight. Ronan nodded. Exactly, equipment. By the 5th day, Black Spruce had begun developing routines around them. Ronan woke before dawn. Rook woke several minutes earlier, but politely allowed him to believe otherwise. They walked the perimeter. Ronan checked the generator, stove draft, fuel level, roofline, and weather. Rook checked everything else. Then came coffee, dog food, repairs, and the slow resurrection of rooms nobody had expected to be useful again. The rhythm should have comforted Ronan. Instead, sometimes he caught himself standing in the doorway with an unexpected pressure behind his ribs. The station was learning him. His boots had a place. His jacket hung from the same peg. Rook's blanket stayed beneath the south window. Coffee grounds collected in a tin. A life was beginning to leave marks. Ronan had spent 5 years making sure his life could disappear without inconvenience. Black Spruce was becoming inconvenient. The thought frightened him. A vehicle arrived shortly after noon, under a sky bright enough to turn the snow almost blue. Rook heard it before Ronan. The shepherd lifted his head from the chair and looked toward the access road. A red rescue SUV emerged between the spruce trees. It stopped beside Ronan's pickup. The woman who climbed out was 48, about 5'7", broad enough through the shoulders to look capable without appearing bulky. Her dark red winter rescue jacket bore a small search and rescue patch at the sleeve. Black snow pants disappeared into worn dark brown winter boots. A compact radio sat clipped high on her chest. Her face was slightly square, weathered more by cold than age, with hazel brown eyes that seemed accustomed to deciding quickly whether something constituted danger or merely stupidity. Her fair skin carried a permanent outdoor flush across the cheeks. Medium brown hair, threaded noticeably with silver at the temples, was tied low behind her neck. She shut the SUV door and studied the station. Then Ronan. Then the roof. The roof worries me more, she said. Ronan had not spoken yet. That's encouraging. Depends which one of you I'm evaluating. She climbed the porch. Marla Quinn. County Search and Rescue. Ronan Hale. I know. That's usually not a promising sentence. It's a small region. You bought or technically volunteered to suffer through. The only condemned-looking relay station for 20 miles. Stewardship agreement. See? Voluntary suffering with paperwork. Ronan almost smiled. Rook appeared in the doorway behind him. Marla stopped immediately. She did not crouch, did not slap her thighs, did not say, "Who's a good boy?" in the voice adults sometimes reserved for animals and toddlers. She simply lowered one gloved hand at her side and waited. Rook approached. He smelled the glove, then her boot, then the rescue jacket. His gaze moved briefly to the radio. Finally, he stepped back. Marla nodded once. Permission to exist, I'll take it, Ronan noticed. You've worked around dogs, rescue dogs, working dogs. Also several labs whose primary specialty was sandwich theft. Rook has cross-trained. The German shepherd's notched ear moved. Marla looked at the silver around his muzzle and the scar behind his left shoulder, but did not ask about either. That earned her another point Ronan did not tell her about. She had come for practical reasons. The county wanted to know whether Ronan had functional emergency communication, enough stored fuel, snowshoes, first aid supplies, and at least 2 viable exit routes if heavy snow blocked the access road. She inspected his setup without ceremony. No satellite beacon? Ordered. Order faster. I'll call the warehouse and threaten motivation. Good. She checked the stove. Chimney? Clean. Roof? 2 repaired leaks. 1 section still needs bracing. Tower? Standing. That was not my question. Then it needs inspection. Marla nodded. You might survive here. High praise. I reserve higher praise for spring. They drank coffee at the kitchen table. Marla picked up one of Walter's old mugs, read World Best Grandpa, and snorted. He hated that mug. You knew him? Everybody around Belpine knew Walter Keene. Her tone changed slightly. Not sorrow. Something older. Respect worn smooth by time. Walter, she explained, had run Black Spruce for nearly 20 years. He was a radio technician first, a part-time ranger second, and whatever else winter required third. Snow machine broke? Walter fixed it. Lost hunter came in after dark? Walter fed him. Somebody too proud to admit he'd gotten turned around? Walter told him the weather had confused better men, and then never mentioned it again. Ronan looked toward the sign near the stove. That sounds consistent. He had one rule people remembered. Coffee first, that was one. The other was, weather gets the last word. Outside, winter sunlight spilled through the spruce tops. Marla looked around the room. This place mattered once. Ronan heard something under the sentence. What happened? Marla rested both hands around the mug. In the late 90s, a defense contractor leased access to Black Spruce for some field testing. Ronan did not react yet. What kind? Navigation, signal correction, equipment meant for difficult terrain. Company, Orison Tactical Systems. The room altered without physically changing. Ronan's fingers tightened once around his mug. Marla saw it. You know them? Yes. No explanation followed. Marla did not demand one. That, more than anything, kept Ronan from ending the conversation. She continued. The terrain around Black Spruce had appealed to Orison because northern forest, old rock, elevation changes, heavy winter weather, and local mineral composition made it useful for testing navigation systems under interference. At first, Walter liked the project, Marla said. More funding, better equipment, people finally paying attention to the station. What changed? Walter. Meaning? He started filing complaints about mismatched data, technicians arriving outside scheduled test windows, records that existed 1 week and could not be found the next, pages removed from station binders. Marla did not claim she had personally seen evidence. She had been younger then, working rescue logistics elsewhere in the county. But the stories circulated. At first, people listened. Then Walter repeated himself. Then Orison representatives began describing the problems as misunderstandings. Eventually, Walter acquired a reputation, difficult, old-fashioned, distrustful of newer systems, the kind of man who thought wires were plotting against him. Ronan stared into his coffee. He knew that sequence. First, a man asks why the record does not match what happened. Then people stop debating the record. They debate the man. Marla watched his expression. You all right? Fine. That word has buried a lot of people in Minnesota. Ronan looked up. She shrugged. Occupational observation. Rook had been resting near the south window during the conversation. Without warning, he rose. Not fast. Not alarmed. He walked to the table and stopped beside Ronan. Then he placed one paw on Ronan's boot. Ronan went still. Marla did not speak. Rook was not looking at the door, not listening toward the woods. He was looking directly at Ronan. The old dog had heard nothing dangerous in the room. He had detected danger somewhere else, in the man beside him. Ronan realized his breathing had become shallow. His thumb had been rubbing the edge of the mug hard enough to whiten the knuckle. The name Orison had pulled him backward farther than he had noticed. Rook had noticed. Ronan placed a hand on the dog's neck. I'm here. Rook held his gaze another second, then removed his paw and returned to his place in the sunlight. Marla looked down at her coffee. She gave Ronan the mercy of not turning the moment into concern. After a while, she said simply, Good dog. Ronan nodded. The best. And somehow those 2 words carried more weight than any explanation he might have offered. Marla stayed another 40 minutes. According to her, Walter's complaints grew sharper during the final year of Orison's work at Black Spruce. Then the funding structure changed. State and federal agencies reorganized relay coverage. Black Spruce was declared redundant. Convenient, Ronan said. Marla lifted one shoulder. Could have been bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does best, killing useful things because a spreadsheet says they're old. And Walter? Left. Where? No idea. Ronan looked surprised. People knew him for 20 years and nobody knows. Knowing a man isn't the same as knowing where he goes when he decides he's done being known. That sentence followed Ronan after Marla drove away. By late afternoon, he had nearly convinced himself the Orison connection meant nothing. Companies tested technology in many places. Black Spruce had been useful. Orison had used it. Years later, Ronan's team used Orison equipment. Coincidence was not evidence. He knew that better than most. The next visitor arrived before he could settle comfortably inside that conclusion. A white SUV came up the access road. Not rescue. Newer. Cleaner. A small blue and silver logo marked the door. Vantage Meridian. The man who stepped out looked to be in his early 40s. Average height, slim, clean-shaven, with light brown hair cut neatly enough to survive corporate photography. His pale face carried the careful outdoor discomfort of someone who had dressed correctly for winter, but did not spend much time in it. He wore a navy insulated coat over business casual layers, charcoal winter trousers, and boots that still possessed their original color. He introduced himself as Daniel Kessick, Regional Site Acquisition Coordinator. Daniel smiled easily, spoke gently, and had the polished habit of presenting decisions as though everyone had already agreed to them. He complimented the repairs. He praised the stewardship program. He admired Rook from a respectful distance. Then he explained Vantage Meridian's plan. The company had won a regional contract to upgrade automated wildfire and emergency response communications across northern Minnesota. Black Spruce's elevation gave it excellent line-of-sight coverage. Vantage wanted to retire the old structure and install a modern unmanned relay system. Ronan's stewardship agreement could be transferred. A better cabin closer to the maintained road was available. Vantage would cover relocation costs. The proposal was not threatening. It was sensible. That made Ronan distrust it more carefully. How soon, he asked. Planning stage now. We're hoping to begin site preparation by late spring. What happens to the old tower? Removed. The station? Likely demolished. Depending on foundation assessment. Daniel opened a folder and indicated proposed access improvements. Then, almost casually, he said, "We'd also have to clear the old technical conduit beneath the tower footing before excavation." Ronan stopped reading. What conduit? Daniel's pause lasted less than a second, too short for most people to notice. Ronan had spent years noticing shorter. The legacy service run. Show me. It isn't represented on this simplified drawing. It isn't represented on any drawing the state gave me. Daniel's smile remained. Vantage inherited quite a bit of archival material through predecessor acquisitions. Some of it predates current state records. Which predecessor? I'd have to check the asset history. Ronan closed the folder. Daniel continued smoothly. It's really just an old infrastructure detail. Nothing unusual in a property of this age. Then you won't mind sending me the records. I can request them. Do that? Daniel looked toward the tower. Mr. Hale, there's no need for this to become adversarial. It isn't. I'm glad. I'm asking for a drawing. The two men looked at each other. Daniel's smile weakened by half a degree. Finally, he handed Ronan a card. The relocation package remains available. So does the station. Daniel left without pressing for a signature. Ronan watched the white SUV disappear between the spruce. Rook sat beside him. You liked him? Rook scratched behind one ear. Strong endorsement. Evening came clear and cold. Ronan stored Daniel's folder on the table and returned to work. Rook wandered through the radio room, then toward the rear door. Ronan assumed he needed outside. Instead, the shepherd crossed the yard and continued toward the tree line. Rook. The dog stopped, looked back, then continued. Not running, working. Ronan pulled on his gloves and followed. Rook moved along the edge of the forest with his nose low only occasionally. More often he stopped, held his head at an angle and listened. Every 20 or 30 feet he paused, then moved again. The route curved behind the station toward an old fallen pine half buried beneath snow. There Rook stopped completely, his ears angled forward. Ronan came beside him. What do you have? Rook lowered his nose to the snow near the root mass. Ronan brushed aside loose powder. Nothing. He removed more. His glove struck something hard, copper. An old cable, thick as his thumb, ran from beneath the fallen tree into the frozen ground. Ronan cleared another foot of snow. The cable itself looked decades old. The disturbance around it did not. The top layer had refrozen lightly, but beneath it the soil was darker and looser than the untouched ground nearby. Someone had dug here. Not last summer. Not years ago. Recently. Ronan sat back on his heels. Rook sniffed the exposed section once and looked at him. The forest around them glowed in late winter light, peaceful enough to belong on a postcard. Black spruce stood above the trees behind them, old and worn and apparently forgotten. But forgotten things did not get freshly uncovered. Ronan covered the cable again without disturbing more than necessary. When they returned to the station, sunlight was pouring through the western windows, filling the main room with a warm amber haze. Rook stood in the center of it, black saddle shining, silver muzzle turned toward Ronan. Ronan looked at Walter's notebooks, then Daniel Keswick's folder, then the old station around him. For 26 years, Black Spruce had been described as obsolete, abandoned, finished. Yet someone had recently come into these woods and put hands into the frozen earth. Ronan had spent enough of his life around secrets to recognize one important distinction. Black Spruce was not a secret that had been sleeping for 26 years. Someone was still searching for something here, and that meant whatever had been buried in the station's past had never really been left alone. Belpine looked as though winter had been built around it rather than fallen upon it. The town sat low between forested ridges, its brick storefronts facing a two-lane road lined with snowbanks nearly waist-high in places. Chimney smoke rose straight into a clear blue morning. Pickup trucks occupied angled spaces along Main Street, many carrying shovels, fuel cans, tow straps, or enough firewood to suggest their owners had learned not to trust forecasts. Ronan parked outside the Belpine Public Library shortly after 9. The building was old gray stone with dark green trim, built in an era when even a small-town library was expected to look as though knowledge required structural reinforcement. Rook sat in the passenger seat. The 9-year-old German shepherd had tolerated the drive quietly, his black and tan coat clean against the worn seat, the dark olive working harness fitted over his chest. Silver touched the edges of his muzzle. His amber-brown eyes followed pedestrians without anxiety, simply cataloging them. Ronan cracked the window slightly. "I'll be back." Rook looked toward the library doors. "No." One ear shifted. "You've already demonstrated your respect for paper records." Rook exhaled through his nose. Ronan pointed at him. "That attitude is why you have no library card." Inside, the building smelled of old paper, radiator heat, wood polish, and coffee that had probably been made before sunrise and was now surviving on principle. Ronan had barely reached the reference desk when a woman behind it said, "You're late." He stopped. She was 72 and no more than 5'3", small-framed but not fragile. Her face was narrow and oval, pale with the natural age spots of someone who had lived a long northern life rather than hidden from weather. Bright hazel-brown eyes watched him through silver reading glasses. Her white hair was gathered into a low knot at the back of her head. She wore a dark navy wool cardigan over a cream cotton blouse, brown-gray trousers, and sensible low-leather shoes. A burgundy plaid scarf hung from the back of her chair, ready for the walk home. She had the expression of a woman who had spent decades listening to men announce emergencies over radio, and had learned that approximately half of those emergencies could be solved by making them slow down and provide coordinates. Ronan glanced behind himself. Late for what? For asking questions. The woman closed the ledger she had been reading. Edith Langford. "Ronan Hale. I know. That sentence keeps happening to me. You moved into Black Spruce. Around here that's not privacy. That's news." She stood. Despite her age, she moved quickly. "You want property records, forestry correspondence, old dispatch logs, or the kind of things people pretend not to keep." Ronan studied her. "The last one." "Good. Saves time." Edith led him toward a rear room containing metal cabinets, microfilm drawers, binders, local newspapers, and several map cases wide enough to bury a man beneath cartography. "You knew Walter Keene?" "I argued with Walter Keene. That wasn't the question. It's the more accurate answer." She slid open a drawer. Walter believed conversation existed primarily to correct other people. Ronan almost smiled. "Sounds exhausting." He was. "Also useful." Edith worked through folders with remarkable precision. She described Walter without sentimentality. He did not like speculation. He disliked long meetings. He trusted instruments, handwritten maintenance logs, weather readings, pressure gauges, and people who arrived when they said they would. He once returned a 4-page county memo. Edith said, "Because there were 3 spelling errors and 1 unexplained decimal." Did they correct it? They corrected the spelling. The decimal? Turned out Walter was right. That fit Ronan's growing impression of the man whose notes remained throughout Black Spruce. What happened near the end? Edith stopped moving. Her hands rested on a thick gray folder. People started calling him difficult. That usually means something else. Yes. She looked at Ronan over her glasses. It often means someone has become expensive to ignore. The first records were ordinary. Orison Tactical Systems had leased technical access to Black Spruce in the late 1990s for field trials involving navigation correction signal stability, and remote communications in difficult northern terrain. There were permits, equipment inventories, schedules, requests for temporary power, nothing sinister. The abnormalities appeared in Walter's notes. A handwritten margin comment beside one test summary. Position shift observed 1432-11, 1432-18. Final report does not show it. Why? Another. Raw display and print summary do not match. Check filtering. Then, third instance. Same pattern. Do not call this sensor noise without showing me the sensor noise. Ronan leaned closer. What was he looking at? Navigation tests, Edith said. But I'm not qualified to tell you what the numbers mean. Did anyone answer him? Apparently. She handed him a typed response from Orison. The language was calm and professional. It explained that field instruments occasionally registered transient anomalies due to environmental interference. The company's processing software filtered unreliable readings to improve operational clarity. Walter had written beneath it in red ink, "If the machine throws away a wrong answer before anyone sees it, how do you know why it was wrong?" Ronan felt something tighten behind his ribs. Edith noticed. She said nothing. He turned another page. Walter's notes became more frequent. Short shifts in bearing, time synchronization differences, brief position jumps that appeared during the test, but disappeared from the final summary. At the top of one sheet, Walter had written 2 words. Ghost correction. Ronan read them twice. That his term? Yes. He thought the system was altering records. Edith tilted her head. He thought something happened between what the instruments saw and what the final report admitted. That distinction mattered. Ronan understood enough about military systems to know that technical language could become dangerous when simplified. He did not want a ghost story. He wanted a mechanism. Anyone around here who can explain this properly? Edith was already reaching for the telephone. Dr. Lydia Carver. Local? Close enough. What does she do? Explains complicated technology to men who become angry when technology is complicated. I'm encouraged. You shouldn't be. Lydia arrived 40 minutes later, carrying a weathered field bag and the expression of someone who had been interrupted during a more interesting problem. She was 58, about 5'5", lean and quick in her movements. Her face was small and slightly long, pale from winter, marked by fine lines around light blue eyes and the corners of a mouth that appeared naturally skeptical. Thin metal-framed glasses rested low on her nose. Her ash-brown hair had gone mostly silver and was cut in a neat bob ending at her chin. She wore a stone-gray parka over a slate-blue wool sweater, dark gray outdoor trousers, waterproof brown trekking boots, and a compact cross-body bag filled with notebooks, measuring tools, and cables Ronan could not identify. She looked first at Edith, then Ronan, then the documents. Which one is the problem? Edith pointed at Ronan. He thinks the documents are. Lydia removed her gloves. Good. Documents are quieter. She sat down. Ronan explained only what was necessary. Black Spruce, Orison. Walter's notes. His own past connection to Orison he kept brief. Lydia did not react dramatically. That reassured him. She examined the test summaries, Walter's handwritten observations, and several printouts with timestamps. After 10 minutes, she said, "Ghost correction is a dramatic name for a fairly ordinary class of problem." Ronan leaned back. Ordinary? The class, not necessarily the consequence. She pulled a blank sheet from Edith's printer tray and drew 2 horizontal boxes. Think of the system as having at least 2 stories about what happened. She tapped the first box, raw telemetry, sensor measurements, timing data, position estimates, heading changes, everything noisy and ugly. Then the second, operational event log, the cleaned version designed for a human being to use. So something filters the first before creating the second. Yes. Why? Because raw sensor data is full of garbage. She looked at him. Not metaphorical garbage. Drift, noise, multipath, timing jitter, interference, temporary errors. If every transient spike appears as an operational warning, the user stops trusting warnings. That part I understand. Then you understand the temptation. She turned Walter's page toward him. A filtering algorithm has to decide which deviations are real and which are noise. In rare conditions, it can decide incorrectly. Ronan looked at the handwritten timestamp. So the system could be wrong for several seconds. Yes. And later the final report could show nothing. If the algorithm categorized the deviation as unreliable input and excluded it from the operational log, it didn't rewrite history. No. Lydia's pale eyes sharpened. It decided what counted as history. The sentence landed harder than Ronan expected. He looked away from the table. 5 years earlier, men in uniform had placed polished reports in front of him. No qualifying malfunction. No confirmed navigation failure. Deviation initiated by operator judgment. He had spent years imagining someone must have falsified the numbers. But maybe nobody needed to. A system designed to clean noise could have cleaned away the only evidence that mattered. And if Orison had already known that possibility existed, Ronan stopped there. He had learned what suspicion could do when allowed to outrun evidence. Lydia seemed to read the direction of his thoughts. "This proves a filtering issue was being discussed at Black Spruce," she said. "It does not prove your device failed." Ronan met her eyes. "I didn't say it did. You were about to. I was thinking. That's where most bad conclusions begin." Edith quietly smiled into her coffee. Ronan ignored both women. What would Walter have needed to prove it? The raw telemetry. Lydia tapped the papers. If he saw the anomaly live, but the final event log discarded it, the raw stream is what preserves the difference. Edith opened another folder. That became an argument. Inside were copies of Walter's formal request that Orison preserve complete raw telemetry from future tests. Several were marked received. Others had no administrative response. Then, gradually, Walter's correspondence thinned. Whole referenced attachments were missing. A log index listed reports that were no longer in the file. One binder had page numbers jumping from 118 to 126. Ronan stared at the gap. Could pages just be missing after 26 years? Yes, Edith said. He looked at her. And? She shrugged. Could also have walked away wearing shoes. Lydia was less willing to speculate. Missing records are missing records. They are not evidence of why they are missing. Ronan appreciated that about her even while finding it irritating. Truth needed people who refused to make it prettier than it was. They spent the next 2 hours sorting dates. Walter's earliest concerns appeared within months of Orison's field testing. His later notes showed increasing frustration, not with the existence of errors, but with the company's reluctance to retain the data needed to characterize them. Then Edith found the photograph. It had slipped inside a folder of local newspaper clippings rather than the technical archive. The print was glossy but faded around the edges. A group of 7 people stood outside Black Spruce in the summer of 1999. The tower rose behind them against a blue sky. Walter was easy to identify from another newspaper image Edith had shown earlier. A lean, middle-aged man in a work shirt and ranger cap, narrow face partly hidden by a dark beard. Beside him stood several Orison engineers. Ronan's eyes stopped on the man third from the right. Younger, darker hair, no silver. But the face was unmistakable. Long, controlled, pale eyes even in an old photograph. And just beneath the chin, barely visible when Ronan angled the picture toward the light, a small scar. Grant Mercer Vale. Ronan did not speak. Edith watched him. You know him? Yes. Lydia looked from the photograph to Ronan. From your case? Ronan nodded once. The room seemed to contract around the picture. Grant had not merely represented Orison years later. He had been at Black Spruce when Walter was documenting the very class of anomaly that might have mattered in Ronan's mission. That did not prove Grant knew the specific device would fail. It did not prove he concealed anything during Ronan's investigation. It proved one thing. Grant had been here, at the beginning. Ronan turned the photograph over. Nothing on the back except a date and 7 names typed on an old adhesive label. But Edith reached across and tapped the lower corner. Look at Walter's hand. Ronan turned it back. Walter was holding a clipboard against his thigh. At the very bottom, partly obscured by his fingers, one handwritten phrase was visible. Only 3 words could be read. Keep raw first. Lydia leaned closer. That could mean anything. Ronan did not answer, because to him it did not feel like anything. It felt like a man in 1999 had been trying to preserve the part of the story machines later decided nobody needed. And Ronan knew exactly what it was like to lose a life because the cleaned version looked more respectable than the truth. For one dangerous second, hope entered him. Not certainty. Hope. He hated it immediately. Hope could make a man see patterns where only dust existed. So Ronan put the photograph down. What would we need next? Lydia gave the smallest approving nod. Evidence. Ronan returned to Black Spruce late in the afternoon with copies Edith had permitted him to make, and a headache that had settled behind his left eye. Rook met him at the porch. The old shepherd smelled Ronan's jacket, then the paper envelope. He gave it no special attention. Ronan found that reassuring. At least one member of the household remained unimpressed by documentary revelations. The next morning, Rook began bothering the rear storage room. At first, Ronan ignored it. Rook entered, sniffed near the back wall, left, returned 20 minutes later, sniffed again. By noon, he had done it 4 times. Ronan followed. What? Rook moved toward an old cabinet built against the wall beside the radio room. His nose worked along the floorboards. Then he stared at a narrow gap beneath the cabinet. Ronan crouched. The board there was slightly different in color, possibly replaced, possibly just aged unevenly. His pulse rose despite himself. Walter had wanted raw telemetry preserved. Pages had vanished. Orison had tested here. Grant had been here. And now Rook was repeatedly indicating a concealed space behind an old equipment cabinet. Ronan told himself not to become stupid, then spent the next 6 hours behaving exactly like a man trying very hard to become stupid carefully. He emptied the cabinet, disconnected a rusted bracket, removed trim, shifted the heavy unit inch by inch. Rook watched from the doorway. When the cabinet finally moved enough, Ronan found a narrow section of floor that had indeed been patched. His heart beat harder. He removed the first board, then the second. Darkness below. He reached for a flashlight. A smell rose from the cavity. Ronan froze. Rook sniffed once, then sneezed. Oh no, he shone the light inside. No archive, no ruggedized data case, no hidden files. A corroded drainage pipe ran beneath the floor. Beside it lay the dried remains of a small pine marten that had apparently crawled into the cavity years earlier and failed to find its way out. Ronan sat back on the floor. 6 hours. He looked at the dismantled cabinet, the removed boards, the dead animal, then at Rook. Maybe we're both chasing ghosts. Rook walked to his water bowl. He drank. Not once did he look apologetic. Ronan laughed bitterly, then stopped. Of course Rook had not been wrong. There had been an unusual scent under the floor. Ronan had assigned meaning to it. The dog had detected something. The man had invented the conclusion. It was such a small lesson that Ronan almost missed how much he needed it. He repaired the boards before sunset. The next morning he returned to the section of old copper cable outside, this time determined to observe before interpreting. Rook sniffed the exposed area. His attention shifted, not toward the cable itself, toward the forest. The shepherd moved slowly between spruce trunks. Ronan followed, marking direction on his handheld GPS. The trail climbed around a granite outcrop, then descended into a shallow cut nearly half a mile from Black Spruce. Here Rook stopped beside a patch of exposed rock. He sniffed low. Ronan crouched. There it was. Fresh machine lubricant, very faint. Then rubber, and disturbed soil hidden beneath spruce needles. Rook continued around the rock. Dense brush concealed a rectangular steel maintenance door set directly into the hillside. The metal was old, paint blistered, hinges rusted, but the padlock securing it was not. The lock was clean, dark, modern. Ronan did not touch it. Someone had accessed this place recently. He photographed the door, the lock, the surrounding ground, then backed away. His instincts wanted the pry bar from the truck. Years ago, he might have opened it. 5 years of being destroyed by evidence taught different discipline. If someone knew Black Spruce was occupied, forcing an unknown access point would tell them exactly how far Ronan had progressed. Better to know a door existed than announce he had found it. He returned before dusk. The station looked unchanged. That was the first thing that bothered him. The second was the radio. Ronan had left an old analog receiver square against the rear edge of the workbench. Now it sat perhaps 2 inches forward. He stopped in the doorway. Rook moved past him and began smelling the floor. Ronan checked the windows, doors, cabinets, tools, laptop. Nothing missing. Cash remained in a small metal tin. His field bag was untouched. He moved slowly into the room, then looked toward the peg beside the tool cabinet, empty. For a moment he could not understand what was wrong. Then his chest went cold. Rook's old military collar had hung there. Brown leather, darkened with years of use, with a worn metal identification plate and stitching repaired twice by Ronan's own hands. Rook no longer wore it operationally. The collar had no classified marking, no financial value, no practical value at all. Ronan walked to the peg, touched it. Nothing. Rook came beside him. The German shepherd sniffed the empty space, then looked toward the rear door. Ronan felt anger arrive slowly. That frightened him more than if it had come fast. A laptop could be stolen for money. Documents could be taken for information. Tools had value. The collar had meaning only to 2 living beings, which meant whoever had entered Black Spruce had not come to steal. They had come to speak. Ronan looked down at Rook. The dog's amber eyes were calm, but his body had tightened. Someone knew the station. Someone knew Ronan. And someone knew exactly what Rook had been to him. That evening, Black Spruce no longer felt merely old. For the first time, it felt watched. And Ronan understood that whatever was hidden in its history had just stopped being impersonal. By the following morning, Ronan had stopped treating Black Spruce like a place he was repairing, and begun treating it like a site that needed to be documented. He photographed the rear doors before touching them. He photographed the radio bench, the windows, the tool cabinet, and the empty hook where Rook's old military collar had once hung. He wrote down the time he noticed each detail, not because he enjoyed paperwork, But because 5 years earlier he had learned the cost of assuming memory would matter more than a record. Rook watched from his usual place near the south window. The German shepherd's silvered muzzle rested across his front paws, but his amber-brown eyes followed Ronan each time he crossed the room. "You're right," Ronan said. "I hate this." Rook's notched ear moved. "Paperwork." The dog blinked. Exactly. Ronan had already spoken to Marla Quinn before sunrise. He had not told her that someone was after him. He did not use words like threat, conspiracy, or intimidation. Those words arrived too easily and survived badly in official reports. He told her 3 things. Someone had entered the station. A personal item had been removed, and there was a secured maintenance access in the hillside that did not appear on the property drawings he had been issued. Marla had gone quiet. Then she asked whether he had touched the lock. "No." "Good. You sound surprised. I work rescue. My standards are shaped by people who drive around barricades because they own 4-wheel drive." She arranged for Lydia Carver to come back to Black Spruce with equipment suitable for inspecting an old confined technical space. By 10, Marla's red rescue SUV and Lydia's weathered crossover sat beside Ronan's pickup. Lydia entered carrying a compact air monitor, a case of inspection lights, several marking flags, and enough skepticism to stabilize a failing bridge. Marla brought rope, a first aid bag, a portable radio repeater, and coffee. "You came prepared," Ronan said. Marla handed him a cup. "That's because one of us should." Ronan looked at Lydia. "She always like this?" "No," Lydia said. "Sometimes she is tired." The humor did not remove the tension. They spread the surviving station plans across the long table, most dated from different years. None agreed completely. One showed the tower footing, another included a buried electrical service, a third mentioned drainage improvements but ended abruptly along the eastern slope. Lydia aligned the drawings using foundation corners and old survey bearings. "There," she said. She traced a line from the tower base toward the hillside. "It isn't shown as a room. What is it?" "Probably a service conduit, cable access, instrument runs, maybe drainage control." Marla leaned over her shoulder. "How large?" "Depends how much the engineer hated maintenance crews." Ronan studied the line. The route roughly matched the direction of the hillside maintenance door. "So it connects." "Likely," Lydia said. "Likely is not the same as yes. You really enjoy that distinction." "I enjoy remaining correct." They approached the hillside access from the station side first. Behind the tower room, Lydia identified a narrow removable panel partly hidden by an old equipment frame. The screws were corroded, but the panel itself still seated properly. Ronan loosened it carefully. Cold air moved through the gap. "Not much." "Enough." Held up the air monitor. "No heroics." Ronan looked at her. "You've met me twice. I form opinions efficiently." The reading was acceptable at the entrance, but Lydia insisted on continuous monitoring. Ronan clipped the meter to his field jacket. He wore the same faded olive-green field jacket over his red and dark navy plaid flannel shirt, dark green cargo pants, worn brown waterproof boots, and the old military watch on his left wrist. A headlamp sat over his short dark brown hair, silver already visible at both temples. He fixed a safety line around his harness belt. Rook came immediately to the opening. The 9-year-old shepherd lowered his head and sniffed the cold air. Then he tried to step forward. Ronan blocked him gently. "No." Rook looked up. "No argument." The dog's ears remained forward. "You're 9. It's narrow. And if I get stuck, I do not need you climbing over me to prove a point." Rook shifted his weight. The pale scar behind his left shoulder caught the light. Ronan crouched and rested one hand against the thick fur of the dog's neck. "Stay here." Rook understood the command. He did not like it. He lowered himself directly in front of the opening, chest on the floor, eyes fixed into the darkness. Marla looked down at him. "That dog is judging your life choices. He has seniority." Ronan entered. The conduit was not a secret bunker. There was no dramatic chamber, no hidden vault door, no cinematic row of mysterious crates. It was uglier and more believable than that. The passage was barely wide enough for a man to move comfortably. Old conduit brackets ran along one wall. Bundled copper cables disappeared beneath corroded clamps. A narrow drainage channel cut along the lower edge of the concrete. Insulation hung in gray strips from sections of pipe. 10 feet in, the space widened slightly. Ronan found the remains of an equipment bay. Metal shelves stood against one wall, most were empty. A few carried cracked plastic reels and rusted holders. Several faded labels remained legible. Orison Field Cal, BSBR Nav Kior test, raw story. Ronan stopped. Behind him, Lydia's voice came through the radio. "Describe before touching." "Old storage racks. Orison labels. Mostly empty. Photograph." He did. One shelf contained shallow metal trays designed to hold data cartridges or magnetic tape canisters. Dust covered the edges. The center surfaces were cleaner. Not clean, cleaner. Something had been removed after decades of accumulation. Ronan crouched. The floor told the rest. There were footprints. Mud had dried in the tread patterns. The prints were not fresh enough to be wet, but far too sharp to be 26 years old. One sole showed a modern angular lug pattern. Another print overlapped it. At least 2 passes. Possibly more. Ronan felt anger begin to build. He kept his voice flat. Recent boot traffic. Marla responded immediately. Don't step through it. I know. Just enjoying the experience of saying it. Ronan photographed the prints with scale markers Lydia had given him. Farther in, he found an old clipboard hanging by a wire. Most pages had rotted. One inventory sheet survived under a transparent cover. The heading dated from the year Black Spruce closed. Several line items had been crossed out as transferred. Others were marked destroyed. One line remained unresolved. Field Archive, B Series. Transfer status pending below it. Someone had handwritten. Not reconciled. Ronan stared at the words. There it was. Not proof of what the archive contained. Not proof Walter had hidden it, but proof something had been left administratively unfinished. A missing answer. He photographed the sheet. Lydia. Yes, I found an archive inventory entry, transfer pending. Marked not reconciled. Silence for a moment. Then, good. Ronan almost laughed. That's all? That is what evidence looks like before people ruin it with enthusiasm. He continued only another 20 feet. The conduit narrowed again, then bent downward toward the hillside. Water stains darkened the lower concrete. There were marks where equipment had once been mounted. Several brackets were newer than the surrounding corrosion. Ronan saw fresh scratches around one bolt head. Someone had worked here recently. He did not continue. The confined space, unknown route, and evidence of recent access was enough. He backed out slowly. Rook was waiting exactly where Ronan had left him. The moment Ronan's shoulders cleared the panel, the German shepherd stood. He sniffed Ronan's boots, gloves, knees, and sleeves as if conducting his own debrief. I survived. Rook pushed his muzzle briefly against Ronan's hand. Your confidence is touching. Lydia examined the photographs while Ronan washed grit from his gloves. She agreed the inventory sheet mattered. Marla was more interested in the footprints. If that hillside door connects to this route, she said, somebody's been using it. Ronan looked toward the forest. And removing things. Maybe. He glanced at Lydia. She lifted both eyebrows. You're learning. They spent another hour documenting the interior panel and the path of the buried system. By noon, Ronan had formed a theory he disliked because it made more sense than a more dramatic one. If whoever controlled Vantage Meridian already knew exactly where Walter's archive was, they would not be wandering through an old conduit leaving fresh boot marks. They would have removed it, destroyed it, or sealed the entire system before Ronan ever received stewardship rights. Instead, someone was still searching. The unresolved inventory explained why. Black Spruce had contained a field archive. The archive's final disposition had never been formally reconciled. Whoever inherited Orison's old technical assets might know something was missing without knowing where Walter had put it. That distinction changed the shape of the danger. Ronan was not walking toward a secret someone had perfectly protected for 26 years. He was in a race with people who might be looking for it too. A vehicle came up the road shortly after one. This time it was a dark gray utility SUV carrying the Vantage Meridian logo. Ronan stepped onto the porch. Rook came with him. The woman who climbed out did not resemble Daniel Kessick. She was 36, about 5'6", lean without looking delicate, and moved with the balance of someone accustomed to carrying survey equipment over uneven ground. Her face was slightly long and oval, fair with faint freckles across the bridge of her nose. Gray-green eyes watched the station with focused unease rather than corporate confidence. Straight dark brown eyebrows emphasized the seriousness of her expression. Her chestnut brown hair reached her shoulders but had been tied into a low ponytail. She wore a dark navy soft-shell jacket with a small Vantage Meridian logo over the left chest, a gray thermal layer beneath it, charcoal outdoor technical pants, gray-brown snow boots, and black work gloves. A compact belt pouch carried a laser measure, waterproof notebook, and handheld instrument. She looked like an engineer who had expected a site visit. She also looked like a woman who had not slept enough before coming to one. Ronan Hale? Yes. Claire Voss, structural and field infrastructure. Her eyes shifted to Rook. She did not approach him. Good. I need to talk to you about Black Spruce. So does everybody. I'm not here about relocation. That already puts you ahead. Claire reached into a document case. I'm here because this exists. She handed him a printed report. Ronan did not take his eyes off her while accepting it. The title read, Urgent Structural Hazard Assessment. Black Spruce Relay Station. It recommended accelerated demolition due to foundation instability, degraded tower support conditions, and a potential subgrade failure. Ronan turned to the signature page. A digital approval block identified. Claire Voss, PE Technical Authorization Code, date, credential number. He looked up. You wrote this? No. The answer came too fast to be rehearsed. Claire's jaw tightened. I have never inspected Black Spruce. Lydia stepped onto the porch behind Ronan. Never? Claire shook her head. Not once. Marla joined them. Claire pointed toward the report. My credentials are attached to an assessment stating this site is unsafe enough to justify emergency demolition. I did not perform the inspection. I did not authorize the conclusions, and until 4 days ago, I did not know the report existed. Ronan looked again at the technical approval block. The name was hers. The number was hers. On paper, the responsibility was hers. Lydia took the report. She read the first 2 pages in silence, then stopped. What? Claire asked. Lydia pointed to a structural table. This report evaluates lateral load transfer through a reinforced concrete east support wall. Claire frowned. There's supposed to be one. There isn't. Ronan looked at Lydia. She continued. Black Spruce has a timber-framed east section on stone and concrete piers. I inspected it this morning. Claire's face changed. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Someone had not simply used her credentials to sign a report. The report itself had been assembled from drawings that did not match the actual building. Claire stared at the pages as though they had become physically contaminated. If this fails, she said quietly, my name is on it. No one answered. If someone gets hurt, my seal is on it. Ronan knew that tone. Not the profession. The moment. The instant a person discovered paper could become a weapon pointed backward at them. For a second, he saw himself 5 years earlier under white hearing room lights. Then the feeling hardened, because sympathy was not trust. And Claire still wore Vantage Meridian on her chest. They moved inside. Claire spread internal site maps across the table. Some showed the proposed new automated relay system. That part appeared legitimate. Black Spruce sat at a useful elevation. Upgrading communications here could improve wildfire detection and search and rescue coverage across a wide section of northern forest. Ronan almost wished the whole project had been fraudulent. Reality was less convenient. The project was real, useful, and therefore perfect cover for people who wanted the old station cleared quickly. Claire pointed to several maps. These are current construction planning sets. Ronan examined them. No conduit. Exactly. Yet your acquisition guy knew about one. Claire's eyes narrowed. Daniel? He called it a legacy service run. Claire looked genuinely unsettled. The construction set intentionally excludes legacy subsurface infrastructure. I thought it was because the systems were abandoned and irrelevant. No. Claire hesitated, then opened a tablet. I started searching internal asset transfer records after I found the assessment under my credentials. She scrolled. When Vantage acquired the old Orison intellectual property portfolio through 2 predecessor companies, the legal asset list included something called an unreconciled Black Spruce field archive. Ronan glanced at Lydia. Same phrase. Claire noticed. You've seen that before. Ronan did not answer. Her eyes moved toward the tower room.
You found something.
There it was, the moment Ronan had expected. He felt every defense return. Maybe Claire was frightened. Maybe her credentials had truly been misused. Maybe everything she had shown them was genuine. Or maybe the entire purpose of her visit was to discover exactly how far Ronan had progressed. You need to leave, he said. Claire stared at him. What? You came. You warned me. Done. I'm trying to help you. You work for Vantage. So does whoever used my credentials. Exactly. Claire's face hardened. That does not mean I'm part of it. It means I don't know that you aren't. Marla stepped slightly forward. Ronan. He ignored her. Claire closed the tablet. You think this is an information-gathering exercise? I think I have no reason to give a Vantage employee access to anything else I found. You have no idea how that report got approved. Neither do you. That is why I'm here, and now you've been here. Claire stared at him for several seconds. Her anger was controlled but visible. I spent 12 years earning the license attached to that report. Ronan said nothing. I have signed bridge inspections, tower assessments, slope stabilization plans. If my name says a structure is safe, I have stood under it myself. Her voice lowered. Somebody put my name on a lie. Something in Ronan wanted to believe her. That was exactly why another part of him refused. He opened the door. Claire gathered her papers. Before leaving, she looked at Lydia. You saw the false structural assumptions, yes. And you'll say so? If asked officially. Claire nodded, then looked at Ronan. You know what is dangerous about people who stop trusting everyone? He waited. They eventually become very easy to isolate. The sentence landed. Ronan's expression did not change. Claire walked out. Rook watched her cross the snow to the SUV. He did not growl, did not bark, just followed her with his amber eyes until the vehicle disappeared among the trees. Marla turned toward Ronan. You handled that well. Thank you. I was being sarcastic, I know. Lydia packed her notes. She may be telling the truth. She may. You pushed her out anyway. Yes, efficient. Ronan looked at her. You have a criticism? No. I prefer watching consequences teach. That afternoon, Ronan made another call. This one went to the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. By evening, Ethan Cole Merritt arrived. Ethan was 45, around 6 feet tall, solidly built with the thick, practical strength of a man who spent more time walking forest boundaries than sitting behind desks. His square face had a broad jaw, lightly weathered fair skin, and pale gray-blue eyes that gave away almost nothing. Ash-brown hair was cut very short, and a close stubble beard showed early gray. He wore a dark forest green DNR winter patrol jacket over a brown-gray sweater, dark service trousers, waterproof brown leather boots, a duty belt, shoulder radio, and a dark green knit cap against the cold. Ethan did not arrive impressed by Ronan's past. He did not appear particularly impressed by Vantage Meridian either. That made Ronan like him immediately. Not enough to say so. Ethan listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Show me what you can prove. Not what do you think. Not who do you suspect. What can you prove?" Ronan showed him the hillside door photographs, the modern lock, the boot impressions inside the conduit, the unresolved archive inventory, the displaced radio bench, the missing collar. Ethan separated each item. The collar proves property is missing. Yes. It does not prove the same person accessed the conduit. Agreed. The footprints prove recent access. Yes, not who, no. The new lock proves somebody secured the door more recently than the door itself. Yes, not why. Ronan almost smiled. You and Lydia should have coffee. I don't know Lydia. You'd be miserable together. Good. Ethan photographed and logged the relevant locations. He placed markers near the footprints without disturbing them and recorded coordinates at the hillside entrance. He also took a small sample from visible lubricant residue near the lock hardware. Chain of evidence starts now, he said. Ronan watched him seal the sample bag. Something inside Ronan loosened, not relief, structure. For the first time, the strange details around Black Spruce belonged to more than his memory. Ethan had seen them, recorded them, put dates beside them. That mattered. Near dusk, Ethan left with copies of the photographs and his preliminary report. Marla and Lydia had gone earlier. Black Spruce became quiet again. Ronan fed Rook. The old shepherd ate, drank, then settled near the stove. Ronan sat at the table staring at Claire's forged assessment. Her words returned despite his efforts. Easy to isolate. He had spent 5 years calling isolation discipline. Maybe sometimes it was. Maybe sometimes it was fear wearing cleaner clothes. His phone vibrated. A message, Claire. Ronan almost ignored it, then opened it. I checked the eastern drainage route against archived Vantage maintenance files. Someone has recently reopened an old bypass below the upper slope. It feeds toward the legacy conduit. If we get a fast melt or rain on snow event, water could move through that system. I'm going to verify the lower route tomorrow. Attached was a photograph, a rusted drainage control assembly. One section had been cleaned recently. Fresh tool marks brightened the metal. Ronan stood. He opened the weather forecast. The screen showed a warm front moving north, temperatures climbing above freezing. Then rain on top of deep snow. He looked through the dark window toward the forest. Claire had not said she was returning to Black Spruce. She had said she was going to verify the lower route. Alone. Ronan glanced at Rook. The German shepherd was already awake. His ears were up. For several seconds, Ronan said nothing. Then he looked back at the forecast, at the warming temperatures, and at Claire's photograph of the reopened drainage system. The danger was no longer only something someone might be hiding beneath Black Spruce. The mountain itself could soon begin moving water through it, and Claire Voss was planning to be on the far side of that slope when it did. By late afternoon, the sky above northern Minnesota had begun to lose its winter blue. A soft gray layer was spreading in from the southwest, muting the sunlight over the spruce and white birch around Black Spruce Relay Station. The air had changed too. It no longer carried the hard, dry bite of deep winter. Moisture sat inside it. Ronan Beckett Hale noticed because men who lived outdoors learned to distrust warm air in February. Rook noticed because he noticed nearly everything. The 9-year-old German shepherd stood on the porch, with his black and tan coat bright against the snow, dark olive working harness snug across his shoulders, silver beginning to show around his muzzle. He lifted his head and tested the wind. "Don't start," Ronan said. Rook looked at him. You are not the weather service. A red rescue SUV appeared through the trees. Ronan sighed. Worse. Marla Quinn climbed out carrying a covered casserole dish in one hand and an expression that told Ronan the visit had already been decided on his behalf. The 48-year-old search and rescue commander wore her dark red winter jacket, black snow pants, worn brown boots, and a compact radio on her chest. Her brown hair, streaked silver at the temples, was tied low behind her neck. Cold reddened her fair cheeks, but her hazel brown eyes were as clear and unimpressed as ever. No, Ronan said before she reached the steps. Marla stopped. That's efficient. I've learned your methods. You haven't heard the proposal. It involves leaving here. It involves acting temporarily human. No. Marla climbed the porch anyway. Winter supper in Belpine. I have work. You always have work. That's because things break. People break too. I don't repair those. Marla looked him up and down. That appears to be a policy decision. Ronan folded his arms. Behind him, Black Spruce creaked softly as the temperature changed. Marla continued. Search and rescue will be there. Forestry people, retired loggers, a few veterans, people who remember Black Spruce before it became your private monastery. I'm not religious enough for a monastery. Fine, your emotionally fortified shed. Ronan glanced at Rook. The shepherd was already walking toward the pickup. Marla smiled. Dog has accepted. Dog has no voting rights. Rook reached the passenger door and looked back. Marla said, democracy appears healthy. 40 minutes later, Ronan was driving toward Belpine with Rook beside him, and Marla's casserole on the floor behind the seat because she claimed bringing food was the price of admission. What is it? Ronan had asked. Potatoes. That narrows Minnesota cuisine dangerously. Eat something somebody else cooked and try not to interrogate it. The road descended through miles of pine and spruce, past frozen ponds and stands of birch whose white trunks seemed almost luminous beneath the lowering sky. Ronan told himself he was going because Marla had information. That excuse survived approximately 6 miles. Then he admitted the truth. He was tired of Black Spruce being silent. The admission irritated him. Belpine's community hall stood near the edge of town, a long timber building with warm windows and a snow-covered roof. Pickups filled the lot in no recognizable order. Smoke rose from a metal chimney. Someone had strung plain white lights around the entrance, not enough to make the place festive so much as visible to people arriving after dark. Inside, the room smelled of roast beef, coffee, potatoes, wood smoke, wet wool, and cinnamon. There were no children running between tables and no band playing music too loudly. The crowd was older. Men and women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s filled folding chairs around long tables. Search and rescue volunteers wore fleece and rescue jackets. Retired loggers had hands thickened by decades of cold work. Snowmobile guides, truck drivers, former rangers, and veterans stood in small groups discussing roads, fuel prices, knees, weather, and the general decline of everything manufactured after 1998. Ronan immediately positioned himself near a wall. Old habits survived without permission. From there, he could see both exits. Rook stood beside him. Marla appeared with 2 plates. You're doing it. What? Becoming furniture. I'm standing. Breathing furniture. She shoved a plate toward him. Eat. Ronan took it. Rook's attention followed the roast beef. Don't even think about it. Rook looked away with the false innocence of a professional. People noticed the dog before they approached Ronan. That suited him. Most respected the harness and asked before touching him. A retired ranger held out the back of his hand and waited. Rook sniffed, accepted 1 scratch beneath the jaw, and moved on. An older woman asked how old he was. 9. He looks good. He knows. Rook's tail moved once. The woman laughed. He does. Ronan discovered slowly that the hall required very little from him. Nobody asked why he had left the Navy. Nobody said they were sorry. Nobody told him they had heard what happened. They discussed Black Spruce instead. A retired snowmobile mechanic remembered sleeping there during a whiteout in 1992. A former ranger remembered Walter Keene refusing to let him leave before sunrise because the wind had changed. He told me weather had already embarrassed better men than me, the ranger said. Sounds like Walter, Ronan replied. You knew him, only through his handwriting. That's enough. Another man, a retired logger named Calvin Brooks, remembered Walter arguing with Orison technicians. Calvin was 68, heavy through the chest with a white beard that spread unevenly across a broad, weathered face. His hands were huge and permanently marked with old cuts, and his blue eyes held the cheerful suspicion of someone who had spent 40 years around machines capable of removing fingers. They made Walter sound like he'd lost his mind, Calvin said. Didn't happen all at once? Ronan looked at him. How did it happen? Calvin thought. Same way a creek freezes, little bit at a time. He tapped one thick finger against his coffee mug. First Walter asked too many questions. Then he was difficult. Then he was old-fashioned. Then he was obsessed. By the time they called him unstable, folks had already been trained not to listen. Ronan's jaw tightened. Calvin noticed. You know something about that? Maybe. Calvin nodded as though that was sufficient. Across the room, somebody stood from a folding chair too quickly. Their plate tilted. A slice of roast beef dropped. Rook had been lying beside Ronan. The dog who needed an extra moment to stand on very cold mornings transformed. He was across the small gap before gravity had completed its work. The roast beef disappeared. Rook sat immediately. Perfect posture. Amber eyes wide with moral clarity. The woman who had dropped it stared. You stole that. Rook looked personally wounded. The hall erupted. Not cruel laughter, not loud enough to embarrass anyone, just warm amusement. Ronan looked down at his old partner. You moved faster than you have all week. Rook licked one side of his muzzle. Marla passed behind Ronan carrying a coffee pot. Medical breakthrough. He's been faking arthritis. Clearly. Ronan laughed. Actually laughed. It came out before he could stop it. Deeper and rougher than he remembered. A few people glanced toward him, then mercifully looked away and continued their conversations. No one celebrated the event. No one said, see, you're healing. No one turned it into evidence. Ronan felt something in his chest loosen because nobody tried to name it. He sat down for the first time. That was when he saw Micah Boone Mercer. Micah stood near the far end of the hall, half-shadowed beside a row of old framed photographs. 5 years had changed him in ways Ronan recognized immediately. At 44, Micah was still broad through the shoulders, but the dense strength Ronan remembered from deployment had thinned. His long, angular face had become sharper. The tan of active service faded to a paler, weathered complexion. Brown-green eyes watched Ronan with an uncertainty that would once have seemed impossible on him. His light brown hair was cut short and had gone noticeably gray at the temples. A narrow scar ran from near his right cheekbone toward his ear. Short brown and gray beard covered his jaw. He wore a tobacco-brown canvas chore jacket over a cream-gray Henley, dark faded jeans, worn brown leather boots, and a simple leather band watch. When Micah shifted his stance, Ronan saw him favor his left leg. The old injury. One shoulder also sat slightly lower than the other. Ronan stopped breathing for a moment. Micah did not approach immediately. That, at least, was wise. Marla noticed where Ronan was looking. You know him? Yes. She read enough in the answer not to ask more. Micah crossed the room slowly. Rook saw him. The German shepherd stood. For the first time that evening, Ronan could not read what he wanted the dog to do. Rook remembered Micah. Of course he did. They had spent months together overseas. Micah stopped 6 feet away. Hey, Rook. The dog watched him. Micah did not reach out. His face tightened. You got old, Ronan said. Careful. Micah looked at him. You too. Still careful. For a fraction of a second, something like their old humor passed between them, then died. Micah nodded toward an empty corner near the hall's side door. Can we talk? We are, right? Ronan waited. Micah rubbed one thumb against the edge of his jacket pocket. I heard you were at Black Spruce. Small town. I live 2 states away. That makes it worse. Micah almost smiled. I thought about coming 3 times. Only took 5 years and 3 attempts. Micah accepted the hit. Yes, no defense. That made Ronan angrier than an excuse might have. They moved farther from the tables where conversation could give them privacy without silence. Rook followed Ronan and lay down between them. Micah looked at the dog for a long moment. Still watches you first. He always did. I know. Ronan's voice hardened. You knew a lot of things. Micah looked down. There it was. The thing both men had come to. I knew you saved us, Micah said. Ronan did not move. Micah's eyes lifted. When Rook stopped, I thought you were losing time. I remember thinking that. His voice was low enough to disappear beneath the hall's conversation. Then that ravine blew. Ronan said nothing. At the hearing they asked me if I saw the navigation display fail. You didn't. No, you told the truth. Micah swallowed. Not all of it. Ronan's expression changed slightly. Micah continued. I told myself I was being precise. I told myself I could only testify to what I personally saw. That's how testimony works. No, the answer surprised Ronan. Micah looked at him directly. That's how I hid. For the first time, Ronan saw something he had never allowed himself to imagine. Micah had suffered too. Not in the same way. Not enough to erase what happened. But the silence had not left him untouched. I should have said I saw Rook refuse the route. I should have said you stopped us because of him. I should have said 5 minutes later that route exploded. They knew that. I should have said I trusted your judgment because I was alive to say anything at all. Ronan's jaw tightened. Micah's eyes went bright, but he did not look away. I was scared. The confession was almost quiet. Of what? Losing what was left. He touched his right shoulder unconsciously. I had surgeries coming. A wife who hadn't slept right in months. Disability paperwork. Lawyers telling me not to speculate. Command telling everyone the technical review would handle the facts. Micah took a breath. And I let technical precision become an excuse for cowardice. Ronan looked toward the hall. Someone laughed near the coffee urn. Rook shifted between them. I don't need you to forgive me, Micah said. Good, I mean it. So do I. Micah nodded. The pain on his face remained. Ronan hated that some part of him felt relieved to see it. He hated that too. Micah reached slowly into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket. Ronan tensed. Micah stopped. Paper. Ronan almost laughed at the absurdity. Of course it is. Micah removed a folded copy sealed inside a clear document sleeve. After the mission, medical asked for deployment equipment records tied to the blast investigation. I ended up with copies in my disability claim packet. He handed it over. Ronan opened the sleeve. The sheet listed communications and navigation equipment assigned to the team. One entry contained the navigation processor family number. Another showed a firmware build. Ronan looked up. You kept this? Forgot I had it. That's different. I found it after I heard about Black Spruce. Ronan studied the serial family again. He did not yet know what it proved. Maybe nothing, but Lydia would. Why bring it yourself? Micah looked toward Rook. Some things I already failed to show up for once. Ronan folded the sheet carefully. He did not say thank you. Not yet. He put it inside his field jacket. Micah understood. That was enough. They returned to the tables separately. The evening continued. Ronan listened more than he spoke. Calvin Brooks described Walter's final year at Black Spruce. Other older locals confirmed pieces of the story. Official visitors arriving more often. Technical trucks using the access road. Walter becoming increasingly angry about records that disappeared. Nobody had proof, but the pattern was consistent. Walter was never publicly shown to be wrong. He was simply described until his credibility became smaller than his questions. By the time Ronan left the hall, the first thin moisture had begun to glaze the parking lot. Not rain yet. Something between mist and thaw. Rook climbed into the pickup with less enthusiasm than he had shown for the roast beef. Ronan put one hand beneath the dog's chest to help him. Don't tell anyone. Rook settled into the passenger seat. Back at Black Spruce, Ronan found an encrypted message from Claire waiting on his laptop. She had sent corporate succession documents and archived technical memos. Ronan opened them at the kitchen table. Orison Tactical Systems had not simply vanished. It had merged into another defense technology group. That company sold selected navigation assets. Those assets passed through a holding corporation. Years later, Vantage Meridian acquired the legacy intellectual property portfolio and related liabilities. Corporate names changed, people moved, responsibility diluted. But the line existed. Then Ronan opened the personnel page. Grant Mercer Val, Senior Vice President, Risk Integration, Vantage Meridian. His photograph appeared beside the title. Grant had aged elegantly, ash-brown hair now heavily silver, pale blue eyes, long controlled face, same small scar beneath his chin. The man who had helped bury Ronan's career had not been damaged by the past. He had been promoted by it. Ronan kept reading. Claire had flagged several older Orison memoranda. One was written by Grant during the Black Spruce testing period. The language was technical, cautious, almost reasonable. The filtering anomaly had been described as extremely low frequency, observable only under narrow combinations of environmental interference, timing drift, and sensor disagreement. Grant argued that immediate broad disclosure could unnecessarily disrupt a major fielding program before engineers determined whether the anomaly represented meaningful operational risk. Another memo referenced contract milestones, hundreds of employees, a pending military procurement decision. Ronan sat back. For years he had imagined Grant as someone who saw the danger and chose evil. The document suggested something less comforting. Grant may have believed himself. At first, he may have believed the problem was rare, manageable, not worth destroying a program over. A small delay in disclosure, a little more testing, a few more weeks. Then years passed, systems were deployed, and Ronan's mission happened. That was the true dividing line. Before it, Grant could tell himself he was protecting jobs and preventing overreaction. After it, he knew a real operation had been touched by the very class of uncertainty Walter had warned about. Then Grant faced his own moment. Admit what Orison had known, or allow the investigation to interpret the clean log as proof the operator was responsible. Grant chose the path that protected himself. One delayed truth had required another, then another. Ronan understood that pattern too. A man rarely woke and decided to become the villain in someone else's life. More often, he made one selfish decision and spent 20 years building reasons why it had been necessary. The phone rang. Unknown number. Ronan stared at it. Rook lifted his head from the rug near the stove. Ronan answered. Hale. A familiar voice came through. Older, smoother. Ronan. Grant. Ronan's body became very still. Grant's tone carried the same controlled concern he remembered from hearing rooms. I heard you've taken stewardship of Black Spruce. Ronan said nothing. I have to admit that was unexpected. Were you expecting me somewhere else? A small pause. I wasn't expecting anything. I only heard your name surfaced in a DNR records inquiry. There it was. Not intimidation. Concern. Information presented as coincidence. Grant continued. I understand there's some disagreement about the condition of the site. There's disagreement about several things. I'm sorry to hear that. You sound devastated. Grant ignored the sarcasm. Ronan, what happened 5 years ago was difficult for everyone. Ronan's hand tightened around the phone. For everyone. I'm not trying to reopen that conversation. You called me. I called because I'd hate to see you pulled into another technical dispute that becomes personal. Ronan looked toward the window. Outside, Black Spruce stood under a dim sky. Grant went on. You went through a lengthy investigation. Your judgment was questioned publicly. Whether that was fair or not, those records exist. The blade was hidden perfectly. People can be unkind when someone with that history begins making allegations against engineers and contractors. Ronan's breathing changed. Grant heard the silence and mistook it for weakness. Think about your future, he said gently. You've built some distance from all of that. There is no shame in leaving old systems buried. Ronan's vision narrowed. He imagined Grant under fluorescent hearing room lights. He remembered Micah staring at the table. He remembered the clean report. No qualifying malfunction. He wanted to tell Grant exactly what he had found. Wanted to force a reaction. Wanted to hear fear. Rook stood slowly. His rear legs needed an extra beat. Then the old German shepherd crossed the room and placed one front paw on Ronan's worn brown boot. Ronan looked down. Amber eyes held his. Not the phone, not the past. Him. Ronan inhaled once. Then again. His hand relaxed. Grant said, Are you still there? Yes, Rook kept his paw in place. 5 years earlier, Ronan had trusted the dog when a machine told him the road was clear. Now he trusted the dog about something else. Do not go where the other man wants you to go. Ronan's voice became calm. Last time you had one report and a room full of people looking at it. Grant said nothing. This time, Ronan continued, there will be more people looking at the records. A pause. Not long, but real. Grant recovered. I'm not sure what you think you found. I didn't say I found anything. Silence. Ronan almost smiled. Then he ended the call. Rook removed his paw. Ronan looked at him. You enjoy insubordination. Rook turned toward his bed. You always have. The dog lay down with a slow grunt. Ronan remained standing. His anger was still there, but it belonged to him again, not Grant. The phone rang a second time less than an hour later. Claire. Ronan answered immediately. Wind distorted the connection. Claire? I'm at the lower drainage route. Her breathing sounded hard, not panic, exertion. I found the bypass. Ronan straightened. Get back to your vehicle. Listen first. Metal clanged somewhere near her. The control was opened manually, recently. There are fresh tool marks and one retaining pin has been replaced. Ronan moved toward the window. The glass had begun to stipple. Rain. Actual rain. In February, Claire continued, this line feeds toward the legacy conduit. If the snowpack releases fast, it could move a lot of water underneath the upper slope. Where exactly are you? East side, below the granite shelf. That's too far from the road, I know. Turn around. I need one more. Static swallowed the sentence. Claire. A burst of noise. Then nothing. Claire. The line died. Ronan stared at the phone. Rain clicked against the roof. At first softly, then harder. He reached for his olive field jacket. Before his hand touched it, Rook was already standing beside the door. The old shepherd's ears were forward, body alert, waiting. Ronan looked at him. Neither needed to explain where they were going. Outside, warm rain began darkening the snow around Black Spruce. And somewhere beyond the trees, Claire Voss was alone on the far side of the slope. The rain changed the forest before dawn. It did not fall like summer rain. There was no warmth in it, only a strange softness in the air that winter had not granted for months. Water struck the deep snow covering the northern Minnesota forest, disappeared into it, and began moving where no human eye could follow. By first light, the white ground around Black Spruce had changed texture. The snow sagged. Small depressions appeared beneath spruce branches. Water ran under the surface rather than across it, cutting invisible channels through old drifts and filling spaces between frozen soil and the heavy snowpack above. Ronan Beckett Hale stood on the porch in his faded olive field jacket, rain darkening the shoulders. Beneath it, the red and dark navy plaid flannel shirt clung slightly at the collar. His dark green cargo pants were already wet below the knees, and mud had begun staining the edges of his worn brown waterproof boots. At 43, his broad, trained frame looked built for weather like this, but his deep blue-gray eyes held an uneasiness strength could not solve. Claire had not called back. Her last known position was east of Black Spruce, below the granite shelf near the lower drainage route. Rook stood beside him. The 9-year-old German shepherd's black and tan coat had darkened beneath the rain. Water beaded across the dark olive working harness over his shoulders. Silver around his muzzle made him look older in the gray light, though his amber-brown eyes were sharply awake. Marla Quinn pulled her red rescue SUV beside the porch. Ethan Cole Merritt arrived less than 3 minutes later in a DNR vehicle. No one wasted time discussing why they were there. Marla stepped out wearing her dark red rescue jacket, black snow pants, brown winter boots, and radio secured high on her chest. Rain had already dampened the brown and silver hair tied low behind her neck. Last contact, east drainage route, Ronan said, below granite shelf. Condition? Sounded mobile. Then the line dropped. Ethan came around the front of his vehicle, dark forest green patrol jacket shining with rain. His square, broad-jawed face remained controlled, pale gray-blue eyes taking in the slope, weather, Ronan and Rook in one quiet sweep. Cell network? Intermittent. Radio? She wasn't carrying county rescue frequency. Marla muttered something impolite. Ronan did not defend Claire. He had already done enough of that internally. Lydia Carver's voice came over the portable radio from Belpine. I have the old drainage maps open. Even through static, the 58-year-old expert sounded exactly as she always did. Calm enough to be irritating. Marla clipped the radio higher. Talk us in. The old bypass Claire referenced appears to intersect the upper slope drainage before turning toward the Black Spruce service conduit. If it is fully open, runoff can enter the subsurface line instead of dispersing across the hillside. Ronan looked toward the dark trees. How much water? That depends on snow saturation. Rain tapped harder against the porch roof. Lydia added, and it is saturating fast. They moved. Ronan led with Rook on a short working lead. Marla followed carrying rescue rope and a compact medical pack. Ethan carried stabilization gear, markers, and a folding probe. The forest had become treacherous in a way snowstorms were not. During a blizzard, danger announced itself. Visibility vanished. Wind screamed. Temperature dropped. This rain whispered. Water seeped silently beneath snow that still looked solid from above. Rook moved carefully. Not slowly. Carefully. His ears shifted constantly, picking up sounds beneath the rain. Ronan watched the dog as much as the route. The shepherd's older hind legs needed slightly more effort on the climb, but his working focus erased most signs of age. He paused at scents, checked wind, then continued. They reached the upper granite shelf within 20 minutes. Below it, the slope descended through spruce, birch, and exposed rock toward the drainage corridor. Ronan saw signs that Claire had passed. A boot scrape, a broken crust of snow, one narrow flag of bright survey tape caught on a branch. Here. Ethan photographed it before Marla removed nothing and touched nothing. They continued. The voice came again. You should have a shallow depression running southeast. I see it, Ronan said. That is the old surface overflow. It's dry. It should not be. Ronan stopped. Marla looked at him. If the surface route is dry, the water is going somewhere else. Ronan felt the answer before Lydia said it. Subsurface. He looked upslope toward Black Spruce. The bypass was not merely open. It was redirecting runoff. The idea sharpened. A real relay project, a real site upgrade, a real weather event. And beneath all of it, someone had reopened a forgotten hydraulic path leading directly toward the old conduit. If the saturated slope failed, Black Spruce could be declared unsafe before anyone finished investigating. Emergency demolition would become practical, maybe necessary. Whatever remained underground could disappear beneath mud, water, and equipment. Ronan's jaw tightened. Grant had not needed to burn records. He only needed weather to do the destroying. Marla watched his face. You thinking what I'm thinking? Probably. That makes me uncomfortable. Ethan cut in. We don't know who opened it. Ronan nodded. He appreciated the correction, even now, even here. Evidence first, they descended farther. Rook moved ahead 3 paces, then stopped. The snow before him appeared perfectly normal, a wide, smooth strip between 2 spruce trunks. No crack, no exposed water, no obvious sag. Come on, Ronan said. Rook did not move. The dog's ears angled forward. His nose stayed high. Listening, Ronan waited. 5 years earlier, a machine had told him a ravine was safe. Rook had refused it. 3 chapters of his life later, Ronan had also learned the opposite lesson. Rook could detect something real without understanding the meaning Ronan wanted to assign to it. The dog was not prophecy. He was information. Ronan looked at the snow again. Nothing. Marla shifted behind him. What? Rook doesn't like it. Ethan studied the ground. I don't see anything. Neither do I. Ronan crouched beside the shepherd. Rook leaned slightly forward, then stopped himself. One forepaw lifted. Ronan unclipped the lead from his waist and shortened it in his hand. We go around. Marla did not question him. Ethan glanced toward the slope, then nodded. They moved left through thicker spruce. 30 seconds later came a sound behind them. Not loud. A soft collapse. All 3 turned. The apparently solid strip of snow where they had been standing near had fallen inward. Dark water churned beneath the white surface, rushing through a hollow channel formed between saturated snowpack and ground. Marla stared. Well? Ethan looked at Rook. The shepherd watched the moving water with ears forward. I'm putting that in the report, Ethan said. Ronan glanced at him. How? Ethan considered. Dog declined route. Route subsequently ceased existing. Even Marla laughed once. Then they kept moving. The route around the collapse cost them time. Rain became heavier. Water trickled down exposed rock faces. Somewhere beneath their feet, hidden drainage carried more. Ronan tried not to think about the conduit. He tried not to think about the field archive. He tried not to think about the possibility that every remaining raw record Walter had fought to preserve might already be underwater. Claire first. That had to be the order. It should have been the order from the beginning. They found her equipment before they found her. A black technical glove lay near a broken alder branch, then a handheld laser measure half buried in wet snow. Marla raised her voice. Claire! No answer. Rook pulled toward the right. Not violently, with purpose. Ronan followed. The shepherd squeezed between 2 spruce trunks and descended toward a shallow ravine where fresh earth showed through collapsed snow. Then Rook froze. His head lowered. He sniffed once, moved 3 steps, stopped beside a tangle of branches. Ronan saw the navy fabric. Claire, a voice answered weakly. Here. They moved fast now. Claire Voss lay several feet below the original trail level where the saturated bank had given way. A young spruce had fallen across the depression. One large branch pinned the lower part of her charcoal technical pants against the mud, while another trapped the edge of her dark navy Vantage Meridian softshell jacket. Her chestnut-brown ponytail had come partly loose. Wet hair clung to her pale face, and the faint freckles across her nose were nearly invisible beneath mud and rain. Her gray-green eyes remained alert. That was good. Don't move, Marla said. Claire attempted a dry laugh. That plan has been successful. Marla climbed down carefully and began assessing her. Head hit? No. Loss of consciousness? No. Neck? Fine. Leg? Right ankle hurts. Hip feels worse. Ronan examined the fallen spruce. The trunk was not enormous. The problem was position. Its weight pressed through 2 branches while the bank below Claire continued shedding muddy snow into the depression. They could free her, but not carelessly. Ethan began setting anchors. Rook stayed above them, pacing once, then settling where he could see Ronan. The radio crackled. Lydia, Ronan, he answered. Go. I'm seeing a pressure change on the old site drainage model based on the flow Marla reported. You're modeling from a map. Yes. That is why I am using words like estimate. What does the estimate say? A pause. Water should be reaching the legacy conduit now. Ronan looked toward the unseen station beyond the trees. How long before the lower equipment bay floods? If the route is open as Claire described, it may already have started. Claire heard. Her face changed. The archive. Ronan did not answer. Lydia continued. If you can close the intermediate bypass from the station side, you might save part of the conduit. Marla looked at Ronan. Ethan stopped tightening the anchor rope. Nobody said what all of them understood. Black Spruce was perhaps 20 minutes away if Ronan moved fast. Maybe less. Claire was alive. Marla and Ethan could continue. The branch pinning Claire could probably be cut and levered. Probably. But the bank remained unstable. And if something shifted, an extra set of hands could mean the difference between rescue and body recovery. The radio remained silent. For 5 years, Ronan had imagined the moment when truth would finally become reachable. He had pictured a report, a witness, a piece of data strong enough to force the past open. He had never imagined that moment would come while a living woman lay trapped in mud at his feet. Claire looked up at him. Rain ran down her face. Go, Ronan frowned. If the archive is there, go. Marla said nothing. Claire tried to shift and winced. You may not get another chance. The words entered Ronan like cold. There it was, the choice stripped of everything decorative. One direction led toward the evidence that might restore his name. The other kept him beside the woman he had sent away because he had been too damaged to trust her. For one terrible second, Ronan wanted to leave. Not because he did not care whether Claire lived, because he had spent 5 years believing that if the truth were finally proven, everything afterward would somehow make sense. The hearing, the loss, the silence, Micah's failure, Grant's voice, the nights in the camper, all of it would become the price he had paid before being returned to himself. But Claire was here because she had tried to prove her own name had been used falsely, and because when she came to him for help, he had sent her away. Ronan looked at Rook. The German shepherd stood above the ravine, scarred, aging, wet from rain, watching him. Rook did not look toward Black Spruce. He looked at Claire. Ronan understood, not a command, not instinct speaking for destiny, just a simple living creature reminding him where the living person was. Ronan turned his radio down. "We get her out." Claire stared at him. "Ronan, that's the decision." He looked at Ethan. "What do you need?" Ethan handed him the saw. They worked for 32 minutes. Ronan knew because his old military watch continued measuring time even when he wished it would stop. Every minute mattered. Every minute might be water reaching another shelf, another tape, another record. He cut the first branch while Ethan stabilized the trunk with rope. Marla stayed beside Claire, monitoring sensation and circulation in her trapped leg. Rook moved twice when the snow beneath him softened, and Ronan used the dog's behavior to shift their working position farther upslope. The first branch came free, Claire's jacket released. The second was harder. Weight from the trunk drove it deeper into the mud beside her ankle. Ronan cut halfway, stopped, changed angle, then used Ethan's compact lever to take pressure off the limb. "Ready?" Ronan asked. Claire nodded. "Marla, do it." The branch lifted. Marla pulled Claire's leg free. Claire cried out once, then bit the sound back. "No prizes for silence," Marla said. "Habit, bad one." They moved Claire onto a rescue tarp. Her ankle was badly sprained, perhaps fractured. Her hip was bruised, but no obvious pelvic instability. Alive, alert, recoverable. That was enough. They started back toward Black Spruce by the safer route Rook had already helped them identify. The station appeared through the trees near dusk. Ronan knew before they reached it that they were too late to keep everything dry. A section of the eastern slope had collapsed. Mud and wet snow spread below the tower. Brown water flowed from a low foundation seam. Inside, the service conduit sounded alive. Not machinery. Water. Ronan helped Marla settle Claire near the stove. Then he stood at the opening to the technical passage. Water moved through the lower channel. Some shelving had collapsed. Metal trays floated against one another. Several old tape canisters had opened, their contents soaked and twisted. Lydia's voice came quietly over the radio. "I'm sorry." Ronan looked down into the dark water. He had expected devastation. Instead, he felt something strange. Sadness. Yes, anger, certainly, but not emptiness. Claire was breathing behind him. Marla was arguing with her about whether pain medication counted as losing an argument. Ethan was already photographing the slope failure. Rook stood against Ronan's leg. The truth might be damaged. It might even be gone. But Ronan was still himself. More than that. For the first time in years, he understood that Grant had never possessed the power to decide whether Ronan had honor. A report could damage a reputation. It could end a career. It could make other people doubt. But the thing itself, the choice a man made when no one could promise him reward, that belonged elsewhere. Ronan rested his hand on Rook's wet head. "You knew that before I did, didn't you?" Rook sneezed. Ronan nodded. "Fair." The rain stopped sometime after midnight. Morning came clear and cold. The temperature had fallen again, leaving thin ice along the edges of yesterday's muddy water. Ethan returned to the lower drainage path to document debris from the slope failure. Ronan went with him. Rook followed. The old shepherd moved more stiffly after the previous day, and Ronan shortened the search rather than pretending not to notice. They were halfway down the runoff channel when Rook stopped beside a torn strip of webbing caught on a branch. He sniffed it. Once. Then again. The material was old olive drab, darkened by water. Ronan crouched. A faint oily smell remained beneath mud. Preservative. Machine grease. Something manufactured. Rook began moving downstream. He did not rush, he tracked. Across wet spruce needles, around exposed roots, past a cluster of stones. Ethan followed several yards behind, photographing before touching anything. Rook stopped at a mass of roots torn from the slope. Water trickled beneath them. The dog sniffed deeply, then stepped back. Ronan heard it. A faint metallic knock. Once. Then again as water moved. He and Ethan cleared mud carefully. A corner appeared, dark green, metal reinforced. They uncovered an old weatherproof transport case, military surplus by design. Scarred and dented but still closed. Ethan immediately stopped Ronan from opening it. Photographs first. Ronan stared at him. Really, yes. You enjoy this. I enjoy evidence that survives courtrooms. They documented position, orientation, damage, seals, and surrounding debris before Ethan opened the case under controlled conditions back at Black Spruce. Inside were data cartridges and tape canisters wrapped in aging protective material. Many were ruined. One case had corroded through. Another reel showed mold, but several inner containers had remained dry enough to preserve their contents. Lydia arrived later that morning. Claire remained at Black Spruce with her ankle immobilized, refusing evacuation until the road improved enough that Marla stopped threatening to carry her physically. Lydia worked through labels, inventory numbers, and readable documentation. Hours passed. Not everything survived. That helped Ronan believe what did. The archive contained Black Spruce raw telemetry, engineering change memoranda, test notes documenting the ghost correction anomaly. One memo carried Grant Mercer Vale's signature beneath a recommendation to continue controlled deployment while further characterizing the low-frequency filtering issue, rather than trigger immediate program-wide disclosure. There were architecture codes, affected serial families, firmware branches. Ronan felt old anger returning. Lydia stopped him before it could become certainty. This proves the defect existed. I know. It proves Grant knew a class of filtering error existed. I know. It still does not prove your mission device was affected. Ronan reached into his field jacket. Micah's mission equipment sheet had been there since the supper. He unfolded the copy. Lydia compared the serial family. Her expression changed. Same architecture family. Ronan's pulse quickened. Enough? No, he nearly laughed. Of course not. We need firmware lineage. Claire spoke from the chair near the stove. I can get that. Everyone looked at her. She had her Vantage laptop open. My access still covers legacy asset records. I can retrieve a transfer history report without altering anything. Ethan stepped closer. Read only? Yes. Document everything. Claire nodded. 30 minutes later she found it. Orison's old firmware branch, transferred through predecessor companies, ultimately archived under Vantage's legacy liability records. The version listed on Micah's mission sheet descended directly from the same branch documented in the Black Spruce archive. Lydia checked twice, then a third time. Finally, she removed her glasses. The chain is consistent. Ronan said nothing, not because he felt nothing, because the feeling was too large for language. Ethan began sealing original physical evidence into documented containers. Claire exported certified copies of the corporate records. Lydia signed her preliminary technical notes. Micah's equipment sheet sat in the center of the table. Different people, different records, different sources. No single piece could carry Ronan's story alone. Together they could force questions that one man had never been able to force. Ronan looked around the room. Claire with her injured ankle elevated, Lydia sorting technical labels, Ethan sealing evidence, Marla making coffee because apparently civilization still required it during major discoveries. Rook asleep near the stove, exhausted enough that his scarred left shoulder rose and fell slowly beneath his dark coat. For years Ronan had believed truth was something he had to possess before someone else could take it away. Now he understood the opposite. For the first time, the truth no longer belonged to him. It existed in photographs Ethan had logged, in records Claire had lawfully retrieved, in Lydia's technical analysis, in Micah's preserved mission sheet, in data Walter had refused to let disappear. And because the truth was finally held by more than one person, no single report could bury it again. Ronan crossed to Rook and crouched beside him. The German shepherd opened one amber eye. You did good. Rook closed it again. Ronan smiled. This time, he did not need the dog to confirm anything. Truth did not arrive at Black Spruce with sirens. It did not drag Grant Mercer Vale out of a black SUV in handcuffs. There was no line of cameras at the bottom of the mountain road, no prosecutors standing beneath the old radio tower. No satisfying moment when 20 years of decisions collapsed into one confession. Instead, truth entered the world through envelopes, secure file transfers, affidavits, technical appendices, evidence logs, interviews, and people asking the same questions in slightly different language. Ronan found that almost comforting. Drama had failed him before. Procedure, at least this time, had more than one witness. Ethan Cole Merritt completed the field documentation concerning the altered drainage system, the slope failure, the recently accessed maintenance infrastructure, and every item recovered after the storm. The 45-year-old DNR officer remained exactly as unimpressed by emotion as he had been on the first day. He called Ronan twice to clarify dates. Both conversations lasted less than 3 minutes. On the third call, Ronan said, You ever ask how I'm doing? No. Good. I assumed you preferred that. I do. Then why did you ask? Ronan looked at Rook sleeping beneath the south window. Testing consistency. Ethan paused. Did I pass? Barely. Put that in writing. Then he hung up. Claire Voss filed her own reports. Her case was different from Ronan's. It concerned professional credentials, unauthorized use of her engineering authorization, internal demolition orders, conflicting site documents, and the circumstances surrounding the false structural assessment attached to her name. For the first time since she had arrived at Black Spruce, Claire seemed less frightened of losing her career than angry at how nearly she had allowed fear of losing it to control her. Her right ankle remained wrapped for weeks. She came to the station twice with a walking boot and refused every offer to carry her equipment. Ronan stopped offering after the second glare. Lydia Carver completed an independent technical review of the recovered data and the related corporate records. She wrote with the same personality she brought to conversation, precise, dry, and apparently hostile to adjectives. When Ronan complained that 47 pages of technical analysis contained almost no satisfying language, Lydia looked over the top of her thin metal glasses. You wanted accuracy. I was hoping accuracy could occasionally sound victorious. It cannot. That seems unfair. Physics has survived the criticism. Micah Boone Mercer provided a formal copy of the old mission equipment documentation and later sat for an interview concerning the events of the operation. He did not try to repair his own history by making himself braver in retrospect. That mattered to Ronan. Micah said exactly what he had seen. He admitted exactly what he had failed to say the first time. Nothing more, nothing less. For once, precision did not feel like cowardice. It felt like responsibility. Within weeks, an inquiry into contractor disclosure practices and legacy technical risk was formally opened. Vantage Meridian suspended Grant from his position pending internal and external review. The company's attorneys issued careful statements. Many of the decisions under examination, they emphasized, originated at Orison Tactical Systems before Vantage existed in its current corporate form. Vantage had acquired technology, intellectual property, and certain liabilities through predecessor companies. Present management, they said, was cooperating fully. Ronan read one statement, then another, then stopped. You know what's funny, he told Rook. The German Shepherd was lying near the stove, one hind leg stretched farther than the other. They use more words when they're saying less. Rook yawned. Exactly. Grant hired counsel. He made no public confession. He did not call Ronan again. That silence was more satisfying than Ronan expected. For years, Grant's voice had existed inside too many of Ronan's memories. Measured, reasonable, concerned. Always defining what Ronan's actions meant before Ronan was allowed to speak for himself. Now other people were asking Grant questions. That was enough. Ronan submitted his own petition for administrative review. The packet was thicker than he expected. Mission records, technical findings, independent analysis, serial and firmware documentation, statements, evidence certifications. Ronan signed where told, initialed where instructed, then mailed away a collection of paper capable of changing something that paper had once destroyed. After that, there was nothing to do. That proved difficult. He had spent months chasing answers. Now he had to wait. Fortunately, Black Spruce remained exceptionally talented at braking. A section of porch railing needed replacement. 2 window frames leaked cold air. One upstairs room had a floorboard that complained with such theatrical commitment that Marla called it the station's emotional support squeak. Ronan repaired that too. Spring came slowly. The snow pulled back from the trunks first. Then the south-facing slope darkened. Water ran through channels that had been frozen for months. The forest changed from white and black to brown, green and pale gold. Rook changed too. Not dramatically. That was the cruelty of aging. It happened in ordinary increments. He slept longer after morning walks. His silvered muzzle spread farther up the sides of his face. On damp mornings, his hind legs needed several slow steps before settling into their old rhythm. Ronan noticed all of it. He said almost none of it. Instead, he built things. A lower water stand, a wider wooden step. Then one afternoon, a shallow ramp from the porch to the packed path. Marla arrived while he was fastening the final board. She stood beside her red SUV and studied the ramp. New accessibility improvements, equipments. What equipment? Heavy equipment. She looked at Rook sleeping in the sun. 4-legged heavy equipment. Ronan tightened another screw. Your rescue organization asks too many questions. Marla said nothing else. That was kindness too. Black Spruce became useful again almost by accident. During an early spring storm, Marla asked whether 2 search and rescue volunteers could sleep there rather than attempt the road back to Belpine. Ronan said yes. The following month, a forestry crew used the station during a long search operation. Then a retired Army medic Ronan did not know came up for a weekend after hearing about the place from somebody in town. The man helped repair a window. He slept 12 hours. He never explained why he had needed to leave home for 2 days. Ronan never asked. Walter Keene's old rules had become easier to understand. People did not always need answers. Sometimes they needed somewhere safe enough that answers could wait. Claire returned in early summer without technical equipment. She still wore the same dark navy Vantage softshell jacket with the small company logo, though the weather was warm enough that she carried it over one arm. Her chestnut brown hair was tied low behind her neck, and she walked without the boot now, though a slight caution remained in her right step. She placed a bag of coffee beans on Ronan's kitchen counter. "What's this?" "Evidence that Belpine coffee is better than yours. My coffee has character. Your coffee could strip paint. Useful property." Claire glanced around the room. 2 repaired chairs. Fresh paint near one window. Rook asleep near the door. "You're staying." Ronan looked at her. "Was that a question?" "No." She smiled. "That was all." Ethan stopped by every few weeks. Usually he found a reason: boundary inspection, trail access, water runoff review. Once, Ronan caught him standing in the kitchen drinking coffee with no visible paperwork. "You lost?" "No." "Investigation?" "No." "Then why are you here?" Ethan took another drink, checking whether you're violating anything new. "And? Coffee regulations." Ronan looked offended. "Get out." Ethan did not. By autumn, Black Spruce had 2 restored guest rooms. Nothing polished. Simple beds, clean blankets, hooks for wet jackets, a small table in each. Ronan refused Marla's suggestion that they create a formal veterans program. "I don't want applications." "Good. I don't want intake interviews." "Also good. I don't want a brochure." Marla grimaced. "Now you're speaking my language." People simply began to know that Black Spruce existed, that if weather turned bad, there was coffee. If a person needed quiet, quiet was available. If a dog needed a warm floor, that too could be arranged. Micah returned in October. He came alone. Ronan saw his pickup from the porch and knew who it was before Micah stepped out. The former SEAL moved more slowly than he had at the Belpine supper. His tobacco-brown canvas jacket hung loosely across shoulders that had once carried much more muscle. His old injury still pulled one shoulder slightly lower, and after the drive he favored his left leg as he crossed the yard. Rook went to meet him first. The German shepherd walked rather than ran. Micah crouched carefully. This time Rook allowed him to place a hand beneath his chin. "You remember me?" Rook sniffed his sleeve. Micah laughed softly. "Probably remembers I owe him something." Ronan stood at the porch railing. "You owe everybody something." Micah looked up. "Good to see you too." They drank coffee outside. The birch leaves had turned yellow and the spruce beyond them remained dark green. The air carried the smell of dry leaves, pine, and distant wood smoke. For a long time they did not discuss the hearing, or the investigation, or 5 years of silence. Micah watched Rook lying beside the steps. "He looks older." "He is. So are we. Speak for yourself." Micah looked at Ronan's silvering temples. "I am." Ronan nearly smiled. Eventually Micah set his mug on the railing. "You don't have to forgive me." Ronan looked out across the trees. "I know." Micah nodded. That was it. No speech. No declaration that the past was healed. No demand that guilt be transformed into friendship before sunset. After a while Ronan went inside. He returned with the coffee pot and another mug. He filled it, set it beside Micah. Micah looked at the cup, then at Ronan. Neither man spoke. Some wounds did not close because somebody found perfect words. Sometimes they simply stopped bleeding when 2 people finally remained in the same place long enough. Winter returned. Black Spruce wore snow differently the second year. The building no longer seemed abandoned beneath it. Smoke rose from the chimney. The porch was straight. The windows glowed at dusk. Boot prints crossed the yard. Rook's tracks followed them. The old German shepherd still made his morning rounds. Slowly now, past the tower, around the storage shed, down to the first stand of birch, then back. Ronan shortened the route on cold days. Rook pretended not to notice. One December morning, Ronan found an official envelope in the mailbox down near the maintained road. He knew what it was before opening the outer flap. The return address belonged to the office handling his review. He drove back to Black Spruce with the envelope on the passenger seat. Rook sat beside it. Ronan looked over. "Don't." Rook had done nothing. That face. The dog turned toward the window. Ronan carried the envelope inside. He placed it on the kitchen table. Then he went outside and split wood. He repaired a hinge. He cleaned the stove ash. He checked the generator. He reorganized 3 tool drawers that did not need organization. The envelope remained where he had left it. By late afternoon, winter sunlight had moved across the table until the envelope sat in a narrow band of gold. Ronan stood in the doorway looking at it. For 5 years he had wanted this. Not the envelope itself, the possibility inside. He had imagined vindication as relief. Instead, his hands felt cold. What if the answer was no? That fear was obvious. The other fear surprised him more. What if the answer was yes? What if the record changed and he still woke tomorrow as the same 43-year-old man? What if Rook was still 9? What if Micah still carried scars? What if the years remained gone? Then what exactly had Ronan been waiting to get back? Rook walked into the kitchen. His steps were slightly stiff from the cold. He stopped beside Ronan, no paw on the boot, no dramatic gesture. The old dog simply sat, present. Ronan looked down. "You don't care what it says?" Rook looked toward the food cupboard. Ronan laughed quietly. "That is a remarkably healthy perspective." He sat down and opened the envelope. The decision was 11 pages long. Ronan read it once too quickly, then again slowly. The new technical record established that limitations affecting the navigation architecture used during his mission had not been fully disclosed during the original investigation. The operational logs relied upon at the time did not preserve all forms of transient sensor and filtering anomalies known to the contractor. The review did not declare every action Ronan had taken perfect. It did not pretend the emergency withdrawal had contained no mistakes. Real operations did not work that way. But the adverse finding that had characterized his judgment as unsupported was amended. The original conclusion, the letter said in language almost painfully restrained, could no longer be regarded as a complete and accurate representation of the technical conditions relevant to Ronan's decisions. He read that sentence 4 times. No apology, no trumpet, no restored 5 years, just a correction. Ronan sat very still. Rook lay beneath the table. After a while, Ronan lowered the pages to the floor in front of him. "Apparently, I'm less incompetent than previously documented." Rook lifted his head. Ronan held the first page out. The shepherd sniffed it once, then stood slowly, walked to his water bowl and drank. Ronan stared after him. A laugh began somewhere low in his chest. It grew. Not because the dog was funny, because 5 years of official doubt had finally been answered, and the creature who had lived through every day of those 5 years could not have cared less. Rook had never needed the correction. He had been there. He already knew. Ronan pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. When he lowered them, the room looked exactly the same. The stove, the table, Walter's old sign, Rook drinking water, snow outside. For years he had imagined the truth would return him to the man he had been at 38. It did not. That man was gone. So was the 4-year-old dog who could run all day across rock and dust without slowing. Time had not paused while paperwork reconsidered itself. And strangely, Ronan no longer wanted it to. He wanted this. Black Spruce, Rook asleep beside the stove, Marla arriving without permission, Claire insulting his coffee, Ethan pretending visits were inspections, Micah's second mug on the porch. The life that had grown while Ronan believed he was only waiting for the old one to be returned. By spring, Ronan had stopped calling Black Spruce a stewardship property. Not aloud, but inside himself. Home was apparently a word that arrived after a man quit watching the door for the moment he would lose everything. A year passed. Another northern winter settled across the forest. Black Spruce stood warm against it. Ronan had mounted a wooden sign beside the entrance. He had made it himself from a slab of cedar. No official name, no foundation, no inspirational quotation. Just 2 lines burned into the wood. Coffee hot, doors open. One clear afternoon, Rook lay on the porch in a patch of winter sun. His muzzle had silvered more heavily now. He still wore the dark olive harness when walking the property, though Ronan removed it during long rests. The pale scar behind his left shoulder remained visible where the fur grew thinner. Ronan was inside replacing a cabinet latch when Rook lifted one ear. A vehicle was coming. Ronan heard it several seconds later. An old pickup appeared slowly along the access road. It stopped well away from the porch. The driver remained inside for almost a minute. Then the door opened. A man climbed out. He looked to be in his late 60s, tall once but now slightly bent through the shoulders. He wore a faded brown winter coat over jeans and old work boots. His hair was mostly white beneath a dark knit cap, and a short gray beard covered a narrow, tired face. His skin was weathered, the color of someone who had spent years outdoors, but his posture was hesitant in a way that had nothing to do with age. He stood beside the truck with both hands inside his coat pockets. He did not approach. Ronan recognized the stance immediately. A man deciding whether walking toward an open door would cost more than turning around. Ronan had once been that man, maybe not in the same parking lot, But in every way that mattered, he stepped onto the porch. Rook rose slowly. The stranger looked at the German shepherd, then Ronan. "I heard this place." He stopped. Ronan waited. The man tried again. "Someone said people could stop here. They can." The stranger nodded, still did not move. Ronan did not ask his name, did not ask if he had served, did not ask whether he was lost, grieving, divorced, sober, lonely, afraid, or simply tired. Walter Keane had understood something Ronan needed almost 6 years to learn. A person should not have to surrender the story of how they broke before being allowed to come in from the cold. Ronan lifted the coffee pot visible through the open doorway. "Coffee?" The stranger looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah." Ronan stepped aside. Rook entered first. The old shepherd walked carefully over the threshold. As he did, wind moved across the radio tower. One of the steel guy wires vibrated. A thin metallic note traveled through the cold air. Rook stopped. His ears rose. Years earlier, sounds like that could tighten every muscle in his body. Ronan watched. The German shepherd listened, just listened. Then his ears relaxed. He continued toward the stove. Ronan looked up at the tower. The sound had not changed. The past had not disappeared. Some scars still pulled in winter. Some names still remained in old files. Some men still had to live with what they had done. But none of those things owned the direction Ronan walked anymore. He held the black spruce door open. The stranger stepped inside. Warm light crossed the snow behind him, and Ronan understood at last that destiny had never been waiting to return him to the life he lost. It had been leading him here, to an old station in a northern forest, to a scarred dog who had believed him before anyone else did, and to a doorway where another tired man would not have to explain himself before being offered warmth. Ronan followed him inside. The door remained open. Sometimes the miracle is not that God gives us back the road we lost. Sometimes the miracle is that he leads us to a new one. Ronan never recovered the years that were taken from him. The scars did not disappear. The people who failed him could not undo what had already happened. Even the truth, when it finally arrived, could not turn time backward. But perhaps grace was never meant to erase the past. Perhaps grace is what allows us to keep walking without letting the past decide where we must go next. In everyday life, many of us carry wounds no one can see. We may have been misunderstood, betrayed, judged unfairly, or left alone during a season when we needed someone to stand beside us. We may spend years waiting for an apology, an answer, or some sign that what we endured had meaning. And sometimes God sends that sign in a form we never expected. A faithful friend, a dog that refuses to leave our side, a stranger who opens a door, a second chance hidden inside an ordinary day. Rook could not change Ronan's past, but his loyalty reminded Ronan of something the world had almost made him forget. His worth was never determined by one report, one failure, or one person's judgment. And the same is true for us. If you are walking through a difficult season today, do not believe that the road ends simply because you cannot yet see what comes next. God may still be working quietly in places you cannot see, preparing a door, a person, or a moment that will help guide you home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you would like to hear more stories about courage, loyalty, second chances, and the extraordinary bond between Navy SEAL veterans and their K9 partners, please subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories. May God bless you, protect your family, strengthen you through every difficult season, and place faithful companions beside you when the road feels lonely. And may you always remember, sometimes the miracle is not getting your old life back. Sometimes the miracle is discovering that God still has another road waiting for you.